Equity futures on the S&P 500 negative by 0.2%. On the Nasdaq, we're down by 0.3%. Under surveillance this morning, opening the door to rate cuts.
The stability of the unemployment rate and other labor market measures allows us to proceed carefully as we consider changes to our policy stance. Nonetheless, with policy in restrictive territory, the baseline outlook and the shifting balance of risks may warrant adjusting our policy stance.
So here's the latest this morning. Bond yields plunging on Friday after Fed Chair Jay Powell signaled a possible rate cut in September, ending an 8-month pause. Robert Tip of PGIM writing the attention to the growth side of the Fed's equation is also a welcome development, suggesting the Fed is attuned to downside economic risk. Robert joins us now for more. Robert, welcome to the programme, sir. Let's just reflect on what we heard from Chairman Powell. What is he setting us up for going into year end?
I think he set us up for doing whatever the data told him to do. You know, he opened up to rate cuts with one sentence. You know, before that sentence, he was talking about inflation and the concerns on the inflation side, which are very real, frankly. You know, he got it wrong on the data, and he really pounded the table at his last press conference about how decent the labor market was and they weren't cutting. And then he got, 3 months worth of bad data in one go on that Friday. So he opened the door to the rate cuts. If they get another ratification of the weak data, he's opened the door. They can cut rates. He can work with his committee. But he bought time, and he bought the ability to act independently because the Fed is not independent. They have to be very careful.
Robert, he also redefined what weak data actually was. We'll get to central bank independence in a moment. I want to sit on the labour market. Last time around in the news conference, he talked about the labour market being solid and anchored that view around the unemployment rate, almost that data point alone. And now he's looking at a simultaneous step down in the supply side of the labour market and the demand side and putting more weight on one versus the other. And I'm just wondering, Robert, where you think that's come from.
Yeah, I think that data is incredibly light in terms of sampling. I'm not a statistician. I'm not an economist. But it's not that many households. It's not that many businesses. And so you need a couple years before that data begins to settle down with all the revisions. And so if you add, subtract, and God forbid, start dividing those numbers and getting unemployment rates, you have a tremendous amount of risk in interpreting those. So, I think the economy is doing reasonably well. But to his point, when you get down
자, 유튜브 라이브 스트리밍 정상화되어서 링크 올려드렸습니다.
You tend to keep seeing them. Some research says, that doesn't.
자, 관망하시는 형제 같은 경우도 이제 유튜브에서 보시면은 차트 및 금일주일 일정 확인 가능하니 참고 부탁드리겠습니다.
We didn't know it. He's feeling that risk, so he's adjusting. Nobody knows what to look at in terms of the data. But I think that's why he's struggling and everybody's grappling with that information.
After this speech, is he setting up the market to pay more attention, though, to the labor market report that comes out?
I think the market always thought the labor market was more important. And in fact, if you just look at the COVID experience, as long as they were concerned about the labor market, they weren't hiking interest rates until they were absolutely sure, the labor market's probably okay. And wow, inflation is way, way, way too high. So this is a Fed that has been trained. This is the third Fed of the United States. And, the most public, strongest opposition to Fed independence was probably right in the 50s, before their independence with Truman. Humphrey Hawkins, after a very brief recession in '69, in the 70s, they wrote this dual mandate, which actually has more parts to it. It's a very employment-heavy mandate. So I think that the markets already realized the Fed would lean on that because the Fed's independence can be shaken by Congress, and the board itself can be attacked as well.
You said earlier the Fed is not independent. Do you mean because their mandate is back to someplace, and that's Congress, that's the lawmakers?
Not only is it made by the lawmakers, they set the targets, but this is a president that can legislate effectively. I mean, we saw this with the budget, where he pushed something through that touched entitlements in fast, lightning speed, and bent the budget rules, right? And maybe, I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, I'm just trying to adjust to reality here. What's possible in this environment? These people that are voting on the rates are under tremendous pressure. They can come under attack from the Justice Department, but at its very fundamental, basis, the Fed's mandate is set by Congress, Federal Reserve Act, Humphrey Hawkins. It can be changed at any time. So I thought he was very artful. It wasn't like 2018 or a little bit earlier in this cycle where he fought on the interest rates, laid out the situation, said things are falling out on the side of ease here. And that's the best way to maintain the ability to act independently, is to not fight it, go with the data, do the right thing in the eyes of the current zeitgeist.
Well, Robert, let's talk about what the White House ultimately wants. And it's not just about lower interest rates of the Federal Reserve. It's lower borrowing costs and lower mortgage rates. Robert, if they drop rates of the FOMC, are they going to get lower borrowing costs and lower mortgage rates?
Well, they have a lot of tools. I left out actually the shadow chairman of the Fed running the Treasury. They're pulling in the issuance towards bills. They're buying back bonds.
자,
Right?
잠시
So
후 5분 뒤
and
나스닥
they've
정규
signaled they're not
트레이딩
interested in
진행하도록
issuing more
하겠습니다.
long-term securities. They're interested in issuing more T-bills. So if they can get a lower short-term interest rate, rightly or wrongly, and issue more bills, you're not going to have a runaway cost of issuance, over the next 3.5 years.
Are you, as an investor, less concerned then about what happens at the longer end of the curve?
I think that if they, in fact, run policy that's reasonable, which I think they will. As you pointed out, there's a wide range of people that are, going to be appointed, have to be confirmed for appointment, and all of that. You're going to get a reasonable outcome in the back end of the curve. I don't think you're going to get a drop in long-term rates, but you know what? You haven't gotten a drop in long-term rates. We got to 4.25 basically 3 years ago, and we're still at 4.25. We've been plus, minus. You're going to get a lot of variability in the data, but you will get lower short-term rates. This is very positive for markets. In terms of corporations, they can deal with a little bit higher inflation, and with the tariffs, we are going to get a little bit higher inflation. But the Fed and the market overall is not going to demand higher real rates across the curve because the private sector economy can't pay it. And that's what you're seeing. I think that's why you had excess reserves piling up, is because nobody wants that money at that rate, and that will kind of cap private sector yields. Treasury yields will push up against that a bit, but overall, that's an environment where higher yielding fixed income product continues to outperform.
We've seen
So
a
I
lot
don't
of
think the
demand
yield
for
curve's
that.
going to get away from us. Yeah.
Robert Tipp, appreciate your time, sir. As always, Robert Tipp there of PGIM, fixed income. Bond yields this morning higher by just 2 basis points on 10s. 10s around 430, 30s around 490. At the very long end of the curve, yields higher by 3 basis points. What did he call the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, there, the shadow Fed chair?
Shadow Fed chair, yeah. Which is something actually that came from the Treasury Secretary. I think it was on this program before the election. He was talking about this as an idea you can have. And what did he say? He says it actually doesn't want that anymore, doesn't think it's a good idea.
He's backed away from that. Neil Dunter of Renmark saying that he's already on the Federal Reserve and his name is Governor Waller. And based on a speech on Friday from the chairman of the Federal Reserve, it sounded a lot like, to your point, sounded a lot like Governor Waller. Up next on the programme, we'll catch up with Liz Thomas of SoFi, Matt Bryson of Wedbush, Veronica Clark of Citi, Colin Martin of Charles Schwab. The third hour of Bloomberg Surveillance, just around the corner.
자, 여기서 매도 진입 사인드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 나스닥. 자, 매도 진입 사인드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 진입가 498.50입니다. 498.50. 진입가 498.50입니다.
Structurally speaking, we do still have a very positive view in Mexico. On the macro side, it is a very attractive investment geography for the U.S. Mexico is hugely competitive in terms of costs.
자, 운용 계약수는 본인 자금에 맞게
So
진행해
why
주시면
would the
되십니다.
U.S. companies not take advantage of that?
And this structural cost advantage is going to lead Mexico to continue to contribute to the growth of US as well. The value chains, the supply chains are so integrated that Mexico has to play a continuing role in the further development of the US, and US is growing very healthily, very nicely. It will benefit Mexico this way or that way. It will benefit Mexico.
Mexico for BBVA is
자, 부동산 관련 지표 발표까지 약 3분 앞두고 있습니다. 사인에 집중 부탁드리도록 하겠습니다. 현재 나스닥 매도 5개야 실시간 대응 중에 있습니다.
we don't focus a lot about and why we're so convinced that Mexico is going to continue to do well, which is the leverage in the country. Because the leverage in the country is only 33%. And when you've seen Mexico grow and BBVA grow in Mexico, structurally speaking, the leverage is so low that just a little bit of growth in the leverage is going to be able to support that bull case in Mexico. So that's why we're structurally positive in Mexico.
It's the most fascinating time for the global economy in years, and our conversations are front and center.
We're stress testing consequential ideas, and investors around the world are scoring them in real time, helping to translate the policies from Washington into actionable ideas for Wall Street.
It's the morning call you actually want to be a part of.
Separating the signal from the noise, with some fun along the way.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
AI is definitely in the center of it, and we're looking for how do we spend time and which industries do you invest in. Investors becoming more and more digital or AI enabled that actually adds value to economic growth. And this, we think, could be time because you have a strong hardware power and you have a strong software power as we see, and it's accelerating significantly.
잠시 후 7월 건축 승인 건수 발표됩니다. 발표까지 약 30초 앞두고 있습니다.
More AI-enabled softwares and applications may improve the people's lives and actually increase productivity in times where demographics are decreasing everywhere around the world. So this, I would say, is a major theme. So digitalization and AI-related technologies, and we think of it technology, but in reality, a lot of the businesses coming up and claiming to be technologies that are actually cannibalizing a lot of traditional businesses.
Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We got to talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
A new level of premium.
자, 수익 청산 사인 드리도록 하겠습니다. 여기서 끊어가도록 하겠습니다. 자, 수익 청산 사인 드립니다. 수익 청산입니다. 수익 청산 후에 재진입 사인 드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 1차 진입 1차 진입권 수익 청산 사인 드립니다.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens.
주문
I'm David
청산이
Duray in Alberta,
완료되었습니다.
Canada, and this is Bloomberg.
The Fed just has a lot less influence on the direction of things than they've had in the past.
We want the Fed to react before we see a big
수익
problem.
청산 사인 드렸습니다. 자, 2차 진입뷰 이어서 2차 진입뷰 대기하도록 하겠습니다.
Even if they cut in September, it's then not going to necessarily be a slam dunk that there'll be a December cut.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern.
Live from New York City this morning. Good morning, good morning. The third hour of Bloomberg Surveillance starts right now, and your scores look like this. Easing into the trading week, we're negative by 0.24% on the S&P 500, down by about 1/3% on the Nasdaq 100. In the bond market, 2-year, 10-year, 30-year, unwinding some of Friday's moves. Yields up across the curve here by 2 to 3 basis points. The 30-year back to about 4.90.91. As we look ahead to the week ahead, things are shaping up as follows. PCE on Friday, Nvidia results on Wednesday. The main event for this equity market worldwide.
Absolutely. Semiconductors going to be in focus, Jonathan. I mean, a lot of people, you've seen Wall Street analyst after Wall Street analyst continue to increase their price target on this name. 40% of their revenue coming from the likes of Microsoft and Meta and Apple and Amazon, which what did they do this earnings season? They boosted their capital expenditures. There's a lot of money going into AI, but what do we continuously hear? The likes of Frank Lee, it's all going to be about China and the rhetoric around China and what Jensen Huang says in terms of them shoring up their business in Beijing.
That comes on Wednesday. Big conversation about them and that exposure to China. Big conversation later in the week about inflation. The very fact of the matter is we're getting closer and closer to 3% all over again, and we might stay there for a while. And the Federal Reserve Chair has set us up to ignore some of this, focus on employment, and cut interest rates.
They say that you have this dual mandate, and there's risks to both sides of this dual mandate, which is why you're in this curious conundrum when it comes to the Federal Reserve. But they have not been able to bring inflation to target for months. They have failed on that mandate, yet they get one whiff in the labor market that there's potentially concern to the downside, and already we see the bias from this Fed chair to open the door for September, which is why some people I'm talking to are saying a little bit of this could be political cover.
Keep going back to the calendar. September 5th for payrolls, a week later inflation, a week after that the 17th, the main event, the Federal Reserve, that meeting and a ton of forecasts. In financial markets at the moment, equities a bit softer, bond yields a bit higher. Coming up this hour, we'll catch up with Liz Thomas of SoFi with stocks close to all-time highs. Matt Bryson of Wedbush as Nvidia earnings take centre stage, and Veronica Clark of Citi as investors prepare for a September rate cut. We begin this hour with stocks close to record highs. Liz Thomas of SoFi writing, it would take a lot to not get a cut in September. The Fed is more focused on labour in the near term, but over the next few meetings, I suspect the focus will shift to inflation. Liz joins us now for more. Liz, welcome. Let's build on some of that. The shift back to inflation, what's going to bring that about?
Well, when you think about where we are right now, first of all, the message that we received from the Fed on Friday was that the labor market had cooled. There's this average of 35,000 jobs added per month over the prior 3 months, which is a number that at least concerns them, and they want to make sure that they don't lose track of that. But I think what will happen as time goes on is us knowing and the realization in markets that there's no room to hike rates. There's a little bit of room for the labor market to cool before the Fed and before really the economy is going to look like it's in a lot of pain. We've got an unemployment rate still at 4.2%, and the expectation as of now is that it'll stay at 4.2%. So there's a little bit of room there for the labor market still to cool off. There's definitely not room to go back and have to hike rates if we lose control of inflation. But the other message that I think was very clear from the Fed on Friday was that, yes, we expect some effect from tariffs on inflation, but we're not going to see it immediately. And we're not sure if it's going to be just a one-time thing or if it's going to take a little bit longer. So that's why I say over the next few meetings, I think that the focus will shift back to inflation as some of that data comes through.
자, 매수 진입사인 되도록 하겠습니다.
That tariffs were just a one-time shock.
Liz, do you still see
매수 진입사인 되도록 하겠습니다. 매수 5개야. 진입사인 드립니다.
체결되었습니다.
진입가
확인 바랍니다.
478.25입니다.
What happened, I think that surprised markets was that he pretty much confirmed as long as things continue in this fashion, we're getting a cut in September. He didn't say that explicitly, but that was the interpretation. The other thing that happened on Friday that I think is a little bit lost in the huge rally is that before that speech occurred, markets had gotten down to less than 70% chance of a cut. So a lot of that was just repricing back up to, I believe it hit a high on Friday of maybe 90, 91%, 93% chance of a cut. So the repricing from 65-ish% back up to the low 90% was a lot of that rally. So just sort of a rejiggering of our expectations again. Is this a sentiment shift to back to risk on? It was risk on already. I think where we're at now is we're back to having priced in this first cut and really wondering, does that mean that there's another one to come? Is this the beginning of a cutting cycle? And how aggressive will this cutting cycle be? I still think that the jobs data next Friday is going to decide for sure whether or not we're getting that first cut. If it comes in at expectations, even slightly weak, that cut will be all but baked in. We're actually below 90% chance right now. But that cut would get all but baked in, maybe even another sniff of 50 basis points, which I don't think is likely. But in the near term, yes, this is positive for risk assets. At some point, if this is the beginning of a cutting cycle and if it starts to be in response to weak data, the market will have to digest the fact that, okay, the economy is now cooling quite a bit. We were cutting because we could. Now we're cutting because we're trying to prevent further weakness.
If this is the start of a cutting cycle, though, how could it be when the chairman himself said that tariff effects will be accumulating over coming months with high uncertainty about timing and amounts?
Well, that's what I think the market's going to have to figure out. Right now, we're acting as if it is the beginning of a cutting cycle, and this is going to be a slow message to keep going down further and further as the year goes on. We're pricing in a little bit more than 2 cuts right now before the end of the year.
자, 현재 매수 진입권 실시간 대응 중에 있습니다. 자, 매수 진입권 실시간 대응 중에 있습니다. 지켜보고 대응에 나가도록 하겠습니다.
Tariffs in PPI data. We're looking for it in consumer price data, so CPI and PCE, and it'll take a little bit longer to get there because if the companies are not passing it through on the PPI side, on the wholesale side, it's going to take a little while to see that in the consumer side to the end result. So usually, let's say it takes 4 to 6 months for that to actually work its way all the way through the system. The Fed knows that. So they're buying themselves some time to say, okay, let's watch and see what happens over the next few months of inflation reports on the consumer side before we signal anything, promise anything to markets that this is going to be a slow cutting cycle that will continue.
Liz, what are you looking for in terms of the data we have yet to see when it comes to the August payrolls and CPI report that could maybe make Jay Powell walk back this idea of a cut in September?
Well, one of the things that I had been saying even before Jackson Hole was we're getting really excited about a cut in September when we've got a lot of data still to come. So we know that the CPI and the PPI data was a little conflicting.
예상치 이탈 시에는 빠르게 청산사인 드리도록 하겠습니다.
PPI came in really hot. So there is already some conflicting message coming from the data. We've got another CPI report. We've got the
전체적으로 블렌드밴드 하락했기 때문에 충분히 상방을 내다고 판단되어서 목표치까지 지켜보고 대응해 나가도록 하겠습니다.
Hot, especially hot, then I think we're going to see a lot more uncertainty before that meeting. But I do believe that it would have to be a series of hot data. So it wouldn't just be a one-time pop in CPI, a one-time pop in PCE, because they've already messaged to us that that might happen anyway. So I think unless this jobs report comes in really, really hot, I think we're getting that cut.
The jobs report is what I want to talk about, Liz. The prospect of an activity rebound. Can we just get into that a little bit more? I've seen that from Bank of America on Friday. Heard Mizuho talk about it too. Jordan Rochester said it's hard to get too dovish if US growth momentum from PMIs is real. Liz, how do you think about the prospect of a growth rebound as we work our way through September into year end?
Well, I think that's part of what the market is counting on with this broadening out trade that it's started to do over the last couple of weeks. You're seeing some strength out of smaller cap names. You're seeing strength out of other sectors besides communications and tech, and even outside of industrials, which has been one of the top sectors this year. So the broadening out trade is enthusiasm that we will have some sort of growth rebound, activity rebound that's durable and can reach into other parts of the economy. I think it's possible, but it's too early to say, okay, this is a growth rebound that's going to look like early parts of a cycle. Because if we're just embarking on a cutting cycle again during this period, we have to really wait for confirmation of some of that activity. And the reality is that the data had been moving in the opposite direction coming into this. Hadn't been moving in a terrible direction, but things were cooling off. GDP was cooling off a little bit. The labor market has really been stagnant in a solid place. Stagnant in a place of strength, but stagnant for a long time. So it would take some really exciting news or some shift in economic developments to, I think, broaden out the growth in a durable way right now.
Liz, it's good to hear from you. Always is. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Liz Thomas there of SoFi. I think we all hope that we do get an activity rebound just for the good of this economy and the good of the country. The problem is we've had this low churn dynamic grip this labour market now for quite a while, and there's been this worry that it would start to break one way or the other, and a risk that it's broken in the wrong way.
And does that change how individuals maybe on the Fed that were feeling a little bit more dovish are going to feel going into that September meeting? Also, Jonathan, what happened to the fact that the president threw cold water on the BLS, their collection, the statisticians? What if we get a very good non-farm payrolls number? Is the president going to look at that and say, look, we're getting job growth back in America? Or is he going to say, no, actually don't touch the number, trust the numbers? That's what I said last month.
We'll look for confirmation from ADP. ADP taking on some additional importance over the next few weeks. Let's give you an update on stories elsewhere this morning with your Bloomberg brief. We can kick things off with the ECB President Christine Lagarde warning against political interference in central banking. She said if monetary policy independence is undermined, quote, it becomes dysfunctional and starts doing things that it shouldn't do. Elsewhere, Keurig Dr Pepper has agreed to buy Dutch coffee and tea company JDE Peet for $18 billion. Once the deal is completed, Keurig plans to split the coffee business from other beverage operations. The announcement coming only a few years after the two combined. And finally, after 163 events and 0 wins, British golfer Tommy Fleetwood got his first PGA Tour victory at the FedEx Cup. He tapped in a putt for par on the 18th hole to win the championship at 18 under. Fleetwood taking home a $10 million prize. Once again, congratulations to Tommy. Up next, the morning calls plus Matt Bryson of Wedbush lifting his Nvidia price target going into earnings on Wednesday. Live from New York City this morning. Good morning.
자, 조금 더 지켜보고 대응해 나가도록 하겠습니다. 현재 나스닥 매수 5계약 실시간 대응 중에 있습니다.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade. Watch Bloomberg Tech. This is the Asia Trade.
This is Wall Street Week. Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg Television.
In case you missed it, on Bloomberg Open Interest.
When we look at our portfolio, we see an IPO pipeline that's the biggest since it's been in 2021.
In M&A and IPOs, we've actually had close to record performances in that space. We're going to have an interesting year.
We're having a lot more conversations around putting dates on calendars. I think we could see a very active second half of the year.
Don't miss Open Interest live weekdays.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Anand, only on Bloomberg.
I think going into the print, the fundamentals, the long-term story is still very solid. This week's earnings, a lot's going to be on whether they can actually surprise the market, especially the China piece. I think that has, there's a lot of uncertainty in China. The China government now is actually reassessing whether or not they're putting pressure on the Chinese customers to perhaps hold off on buying the NVIDIA chips.
That was Frank Lee of HSBC looking ahead to numbers from NVIDIA. Those numbers drop in later on this week on Wednesday. If you're just tuning in, welcome to the program. Equity futures negative by 1/3% on the S&P 500, down by 0.4 on the Nasdaq. That's the price action. Let's get you some morning calls. First up, Bank of America calling American Eagle to underperform, saying navigating tariffs will be tough for the company. That stock is down by 4%. Your second call from Morgan Stanley lowering its price target on BJ's to 115, expecting tariffs and consumer sentiment to weigh down second half growth margins. And finally, Stifel raising its price target on NVIDIA to 212, believing its leadership in AI infrastructure remains unchallenged. Those numbers 2 days away. Let's stick with NVIDIA. Investors hoping the chip giant can soothe fears about AI spending. Stock little change this morning. Wild ride over the past few weeks. Mandeep Singh of Bloomberg Intelligence joins us now for more. Mandeep, good morning.
Morning.
Wild ride over the past few weeks on what's been developing over in China. So what do you expect to hear in 2 days' time?
Well, so the buy-side bogey for the next quarter is obviously higher. They have de-risked the China revenue. But for me, the key commentary is around the reasoning models and how it's driving up the compute demand. We know that reasoning models use more compute, so that's a driver. Everyone called out how they were short of GPUs in the past 90 days. But look, when it comes to the long-term sustainability of growth, it comes down to what the sovereigns are doing, what China exposure is, because half of NVIDIA's revenue is from hyperscalers. The other half, the growth sustainability, hinges on sovereigns and China. So we know China is not ready to buy H20s anymore. What happens to the sovereigns given the geopolitical situation we are in right now?
How do they manage the China situation? Just breathe some life into that conversation. Clearly the Chinese are offended by the fact the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, based on reports, turned around to them and said, you're not going to get our highest tech. So they said, OK, we're not buying the H20 either. How's this going to resolve itself?
Well, so look, I mean, H20s as a SKU that they were trying to sell, it was lower ASPs. To my mind, Street is focused on NVIDIA's margins as well. So if the margins continue to go down, they said in the second half, margins will go back to mid 70%. That is where, there will be increased concern about EPS growth and just the sustainability of EPS growth, because margins is what has drove the, investors to underwrite a 40 times earnings multiple. So from that perspective, China is very important because that's the incremental demand. And if they're not even able to sell H20s, it just tells you they will face more ASP pressure because you take out, the biggest large language model companies that are training their large language models on chips that are not NVIDIA's.
Mandeep, stay with us. I want to bring in Matt Bryson of Wedbush. Raised his price target on NVIDIA to 210 going into earnings on Wednesday. Matt Bryson joins us now for more. Matt, welcome to the program, sir. Let's talk about what you're expecting on Wednesday and the margin risk that Mandeep was just talking about.
Yeah, so on Wednesday, I think that NVIDIA gives us certainly better numbers than they guided to. We've only gotten good news during the quarter in terms of both how they've executed, but then CSP spend, also how Blackwell Ultra's ramping. And so typically management has given themselves a little bit of wiggle room, and so would expect another beat. In terms of margins going forward, or margins during the quarter, again, with execution looking better, I don't see a whole lot of risk to margins in the quarter. I think the question going forward was if NVIDIA has to pay this export tax, what might the impact be on gross margins to product going to China? If that China revenue is lower, if anything, in my mind, that moderates the risk around gross margins.
Matt, when you say export tax, you're talking about the 15% of the profit they would get from selling these chips into China only. But if Beijing's not buying the chips, they're not paying that tax. How much is your price target and your lifting of the price target relying on them still being able to sell into China?
Yeah, so if you look at my model, I added roughly $1 billion and a half to revenue in their fiscal Q3, fiscal Q4. Versus, remember, in fiscal Q2, they were doing $8 billion to China. So I have a relatively modest increase in revenue. I still expect that they are able to ship some H20s into China. Far more conservative, though, in terms of what I'm expecting versus what they had been shipping previously.
How concerned are you about the fact that there's reports that NVIDIA is telling its component suppliers to stop making production for the components that are going into the H20s because they're not going to have the buyer, Beijing, when it comes to these chips?
Yeah, remember, NVIDIA had a relatively abrupt notice back in April when they had to stop shipping. They wrote off a bunch of inventory. Some of that was work in process, some of that was finished inventory. I believe that one of the things that NVIDIA has been trying to figure out, and the variables have obviously been changing, is how much additional inventory do they really need to produce, or how many additional chips and boards do they need to produce before they start shifting to newer models. So there's been a lot of news out recently around them having Blackwell variants of those China chips. So I think in part what NVIDIA is adjusting is how much additional production, how much additional inventory do they build, given they already have this inventory in-house, and they've got a new model that's coming out in, let's call it, the next 6 to 9 months.
Matt, let's turn to Intel, another company that falls under your coverage. Last time I looked, you had a neutral rating on the stock. Have things changed for you since Friday?
No, not really. Right?
현재 시점에서 길게 보면 수세전환 나아질 수 있기 때문에 좀 길게 보도록 하겠습니다. 현재 보합권에서 약손실권 왔다 갔다 하고 있습니다. 시세 전환까지 가능하다고 판단되기 때문에 좀 길게 보고 대응해 나가도록 하겠습니다.
Well, Matt, can I get into that? What's passive about this White House? How active do you think they're going to be?
I don't know. That's a great question. So does this lead us down a path where the government takes steps to advantage Intel versus other competitors, in part because of the stake? That I don't know. Do they allow Intel to potentially spin out the foundry business, or fab business, which would be a way for Intel to create value for shareholders? There was language around them having an option granted if Intel owned less than, I think it was 50% of the fab business at some point. So maybe that means that a breakup could be on the table. But the answer really is I've been surprised again and again over the last 6 months, and I expect to be surprised over the next 6 months.
Matt, do you think, given this stake, that Intel is going to operate what's best for the company and shareholders, or it's going to do the bidding of politicians in Washington?
I think to some extent the two are somewhat the same in the sense that I think what shareholders need is they need Intel to have a better product and to regain share, to regain margins, to regain profitability. I think for Washington, they want Intel to have a successful fab, and in that sense, you know, their goals are aligned, right? The U.S. wants a stable, solid producer of
자, 짧게 끊어가도록 하겠습니다. 여기서 끊고 재진입하도록 하겠습니다. 짧게 끊어가도록 하겠습니다.
America's national security is what we need. Matt Bryson of Wedbush, thank you, sir. Appreciate your
자,
time.
여기서 수익 청산
Mandy, I
후에
want to come back to you.
재진입하도록
It's a
하겠습니다.
gut punch for capitalism, according to a lot of people. Is it a good thing for Intel?
I mean, I equate it to the situation where there were too big to fail banks back in 2008. The government bailed them out. And even in the last 2 years, you know, the affiliation that Tesla had with President Trump was a positive for the stocks. So from that perspective, I do think, you know, near term, it does sound like a positive given the government wants to save the company. They want to save the foundry business. And I wouldn't be surprised if Intel ends up winning some orders from fabless chip makers for some sort of
Wouldn't
design.
surprise me either. Would not surprise me either. Whether they can actually build the stuff that those fabless companies actually want built is another thing altogether. Do you think they can?
It won't be cutting edge, but you know, Intel is still the leader when it
자, 약
comes to
20만 원권의
chips.
수익 청산
So
사인
granted, they
드렸습니다.
won't be building the
현재
cutting-edge GPUs, the 2nm
지금
GPUs
캡처가
that
늦어져가지고
TSMC is building, but still there's a lot of semiconductor business because of this data
수익
center
청산
and
후에
AI wave that is out
트레이딩에
there. And I
나가도록
think
하겠습니다.
even if Intel wins a small sliver of that, that'll be positive.
This is going to be quite a ride for the next few years.
I like how Mandeep says he wouldn't be surprised. I don't think anyone would be surprised what the next step of this story is. And Mandeep's talking about if Intel's able to win some business. Is it going to actually be winning business because of their technology, or are they going to be dictated? Other companies be dictated that they need to buy their product.
I keep asking the
3차
same
진입뷰
question.
대기하도록 하겠습니다. 3차 진입뷰 대기하도록 하겠습니다.
China for Intel. Waiting for the Chinese response to this, the US government taking a stake in a supplier of technology to Chinese companies.
I think the US, though, will just laugh in Beijing's face because this is exactly what they do.
I'm sure they will. But if the shoe was on the other foot, you know exactly what would be happening here.
Absolutely.
You know, and this is what we've got to watch to see how this plays out in Washington, D.C. and beyond in Beijing. Up next on the programme, Veronica Clark of Citi, as we await key inflation data later this week, plus your morning movers, Wayfair shares falling on reports of possible tariffs on furniture.
주문 청산이 완료되었습니다.
그래서 매도 진입 사인 드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 매도 5계약입니다.
체결되었습니다.
진입가
확인 바랍니다.
472.25입니다. 472.25. 자, 매도 진입 사인 드립니다. 자, 매도 진입 대응 이어 나가도록 하겠습니다. 472.25 매도 진입입니다. 자, 계약수는 운용하시는 자금에 맞게 설정해 주시면 되십니다. 종목 또한 마이크로 나스닥, 일반 나스닥 나눠져 있으니 운용하시는 자금에 맞게 종목 설정 및 계약수 설정해 주시면 되십니다. 자, 매도 5계약 실시간 대응 이어나가도록 하겠습니다. 진입가 472.25입니다.
Right, okay, ready?
David, what initially sparked your interest in this topic of longevity?
15 years ago, I turned 60, and I began to wonder how much longer I'm likely to live and what I could do to extend my life. On longevity, I talk with the leading experts in science and medicine to educate people about how they might be able to change their conduct so that they can live a happier and healthier life. I'm David Rubenstein. Join me on a 4-part journey as I explore the great quest for longevity. Only on Bloomberg.
Our global headquarters in New York, I'm Danny Berger. Welcome to Bloomberg Brief. Let's set your agenda.
Bloomberg Brief delivers the market news, data, and analysis you need live every weekday only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything. U.S. jobs numbers are released. Bloomberg has the report under surveillance with crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed. Nobody covers Jobs Day like Bloomberg.
Technology is embedded in every aspect
자,
of our
시카고연은
lives.
전미 경제활동 지수 잠시 후 발표됩니다. 약 10초 뒤 데이터 발표됩니다.
The latest stories of the people and companies pushing the tech sector to new frontiers.
And the politics that shape global tech markets.
I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Watch Bloomberg Tech every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg Television.
On Friday, snapped a 5-day slide on the S&P 500 with the biggest daily gain going back to May. Equity futures this morning, and good morning to you. Negative by a third of 1% on the S&P, down just 0.4.
자, 시카고연은 전미 경제활동지수 발표되었고요. 예상보다 저조하게 발표가 되었습니다. 자, 이전 예상치 높은 조정이 되는 모습이 확인되고 있고요. 현재 진입권 대응 이어나가도록 하겠습니다.
Rather, the coffee chain listed in Amsterdam. That deal, once completed, it would also see Keurig and Dr. Pepper split into its coffee
자,
company.
여기서 수익 청산 끊어가도록 하겠습니다. 자, 수익 청산 사인드립니다. 수익 청산입니다.
First merged, the acquirer often falls in these types of deals. So Keurig, Dr. Pepper down about 7%, with JDE surging in the Amsterdam trade. Intel, that's also higher. You all were discussing
수익
this before.
청산
The commercial
사인드립니다.
rating U.S. government taking just under a 10% stake in the company, funding the $8.9 billion through the CHIPS Act. Intel saying that it would be a passive stake by the U.S. government. Even so, those shares up 1.7% this morning. Finally, also after the bell on Friday, Trump announced that the U.S. would be investigating imports of furniture coming into the U.S. for 50 days, and after that 50 days, they would look at a tariff rate. So pushing forward to sectoral tariffs. So companies like
자, 이제 PC에 오류가 있어서 말씀드리는 수익 청산 금액과 자, 올려드리는 사진에 평가 손익 다르게 확인될 수 있는 점 양해 부탁드리겠습니다. 자, 4차 진입뷰 대기하도록 하겠습니다. 자, 4차 진입뷰 대기하도록 하겠습니다.
주문 청산이 완료되었습니다.
Walmart numbers from last week, when the CEO came out and said tariff costs are rising every single week. They're going to keep on rising.
Absolutely. And what did we hear from Henrietta Trace? If you see IEEPA being struck down, this means by a sector basis, the administration is going to have to do 232 or 301 investigations. That means every sector is going to get one of these investigations.
Inflation in focus this week. Core PCE the key data point to watch, the Fed's preferred measure of inflation due out on Friday. Ira Jersey of Bloomberg Intelligence joins us now for more. Ira, welcome to the program, buddy. What are you looking for later this week? Are we seriously going to have a 3% inflation print in America and a Federal Reserve come out, cut rates and signal there's more to come?
Well, I think if we get a 3%, which is not the consensus forecast, then the Federal Reserve would have to rethink a September rate cut. But if we get the year-on-year number around 2.5%, so maybe slightly below what the consensus is, then I think that does open the door for the Federal Reserve to cut. And you know, the Fed doesn't like to be one and done or just cut a little bit and then pause and wait. There tends to be some policy momentum. So I think the Federal Reserve needs to be convinced that they need to start, and then once they start, they'll cut interest rates 100 or 250 basis points. And so you need a weaker than expected number probably to ensure.
자, 재진입 사인드립니다. 동일하게 매도 진입 5계약 진입해 보도록 하겠습니다. 자, 진입가 470.50입니다. 470.50 매도 5계약입니다.
A reasonable base case is that the effects will be relatively short-lived. A one-time shift in the price level. Of course, one time does not mean all at once. That last line, Ira, I think is so important. Isn't that a chairman basically setting us up to ignore inflation for several months and maybe even longer into 2026?
Well, that's certainly the way that the market took that kind of language on Friday, and also the lack of shift toward an inflation bias in the policy framework, which I think was very important. There were a lot of people who thought, oh, the Fed is going to lean more toward worrying about inflation instead of employment. And when they didn't do that, that's one of the reasons you saw that pretty significant rally, particularly in the front end of the yield curve on Friday. I don't think that the market's going to look through it, but I think that the market is not going to be as worried about the goods inflation, but look at and focus on the services sector, and not only the housing sector, but the core services sector that is very domestically focused. And are these goods price increases really affecting consumer behavior and maybe slowing price growth in services and maybe slowing consumer spending? Because remember, we get that PC data, we also get the personal income and spending data. So that will be, at least in my estimation, as important as the inflation-only data.
Ira, just before you go, I just want to talk about developments in the yield curve. Clearly the curve steepened on Friday, but the whole curve dropped lower. Had a bit of steepness come back through the curve this morning, but yields are pushing higher. That 30-year move, yields up about 3 or 4 basis points this morning. Ira, just how disconnected and unanchored is the long end from this story, this conversation we're having about the front end?
Well, it's not completely, and we've been thinking that the long end was going to stay basically in the range where it's been recently, and the front end was going to do all the work in the curve, where we get this bull steepening of the yield curve where the front end rallies, the long end does a whole lot of nothing, because people are worried about the fiscal situation and the potential for higher long-run inflation if the Federal Reserve, in fact, does cut interest rates very aggressively.
Ira Jersey of Bloomberg Intelligence. Ira, thank you. 30-year bond yields higher by, let's call it 3 basis points, 491 right now. Let's stick with inflation and the path forward for the Federal Reserve. Veronica Clark of Citi writing, the worst-case scenario for tariff-related inflation has been avoided. The biggest test of tariff pass-through dynamics will likely be data from August through October. Veronica joins us now for more. Veronica, good morning.
Good morning.
You noticed the same line on inflation. Is transitory back at the Federal Reserve?
That word specifically, probably not. But yeah, this is a Fed that's setting up to look through maybe multiple months of some stronger inflation data. Obviously, it's going to depend on the details. Do we see services inflation slowing? Are inflation expectations anchored? But yeah, that was a pretty dovish comment from Chair Powell.
If they're saying look through it, then basically the market is only going to be focused on what? The labor market?
I think that's the most important. And there definitely, can be some stronger inflation scenarios. We don't know exactly how this will all play out. But I do think it's probably the case that demand is soft enough.
자, 현재 매도 진입권 실시간 대응 중에 있습니다. 대응 이어나가도록 하겠습니다.
Somewhat drawn out. And that comes down to the demand backdrop, which is the labor market. If the labor market is slowing, that's what they're going to be much more focused on.
Based off all of this in Powell's speech on Friday, is the Fed basically accepting that they'll never hit a 2% inflation target again? Or at least in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think at some point, if we really are sticky at something like 3%, that they won't be comfortable with that. But we will have, this multiple month period of some stronger data, but it won't necessarily be the true persistent kind of inflation that would get them concerned. And then maybe a year or so from now, we're back towards 2%.
I found the analysis of the labour market slightly more controversial. This was an individual that sat at the news conference a number of weeks ago. Predates NFP, sure. But think about what he said at the news conference. Labour market solid, anchored the view around the unemployment rate. A few days later, what did unemployment do? Not a lot compared to the massive negative revisions we saw in payrolls. Now, I'll spell out basically what he told us on Friday, and you can give me your analysis of things. Essentially, the chairman is saying that yes, we've had a step down in supply and a step down in demand, which has kept the
자, 수익 청산하도록 하겠습니다. 자, 수익 청산 사인드립니다.
But I'm
수익
going to put more weight on the
청산하겠습니다.
step down in demand. Now, that's your camp. I understand that. But surely for the Federal Reserve, shouldn't they be
수익
focused on measures of
청산하도록
slack?
하겠습니다.
Shouldn't they be able to sit there and say, yes, demand's seen a step down, but measures of slack have remained stable, so we're going to remain on guard for inflation?
Yeah, I think if we don't see the unemployment rate moving higher, it will be hard maybe to get certainly bigger, cuts all at once. We're not expecting 50s. But I think the issue, and Powell did still talk about, the labor market this way in July, is why is demand weakening? What's going to stop that? If rates are restrictive, rates are probably not where they should be then.
That's a fair comment. Just how restrictive are we then?
I think rates are restrictive. Obviously we look at
자,
the
수익
long
청산
run
사인
dot,
드렸습니다. 현대진입권 수익 청산 사인
5.10%
드렸습니다.
But I think if you look at something like housing, that's a really good example of you don't even necessarily need rates to go higher. You just leave them at restrictive levels, and you've gotten that contraction again.
John's been bringing up the point, though, when the Fed cut last year, it actually didn't help the housing market because
자,
mortgage rates
5개월 기준 약 60만 원권 수익 청산 사인 드렸는데요.
this is going to happen this time around.
캡처가 지속적으로 늦어지면서 조금씩 이제
주문 청산이 완료되었습니다.
말씀드린 금액보다 즉 낮게 나오고 있습니다. 일단 수익 청산 후에 5차 진입뷰 대기하도록 하겠습니다.
Yeah, we do. I think it is harder to get those big cuts at this stage, at least starting with that. Obviously rates were at a higher level last year. You weren't as concerned on the inflation side of things. But I think this is a Fed that's going to proceed with a series of cuts.
What are you expecting for 2026? And is there a dividing line between what happens before May and what happens after May?
Yeah, we are still expecting that this is going to be a Fed that is data dependent. Obviously, they have to majority vote to have a policy reached. We still think it's a consecutive 5.
A consecutive 5. So you don't think a whole lot changes when we get that new Fed chair?
I don't think necessarily. Yeah, we'll
Where does
obviously.
that thinking come from?
I mean, there is obviously a lot of pressure on them. But I think it depends obviously on who the chair will be. If it is someone like Governor Waller, market's very familiar with him. We know exactly how he thinks.
Governor Waller would be a super comfortable choice for Wall Street, I think, at this point.
Absolutely. He's someone that Wall Street really admires and backs at this moment. Even if they don't agree with his view, they think he's credible, and they think he can represent an independent Fed and not someone that's just doing White House bidding, like maybe the president's own NEC.
자, 현재 5차 진입뷰 대기 중에 있습니다.
What do you think the approach of the new Fed chair will be to the balance sheet?
Yeah, it's really not gotten a lot of attention. It could be
자,
interesting if it's
5차 진입뷰 대기하면서 백악관 경제부분 케빈 셋 CNBC 인터뷰 내용 말씀 한번 드리고 가겠습니다. 자, 미국과 한국이 무역 협상이 곧 타결되기를 기대한다라고 이제 CNBC 인터뷰에서 말한 바가 있고요. 이 부분도 매매하시면서 참고하시길 바라겠습니다. 자, 다시 한번 매수 진입 사인 드리도록 매도 진입 사인 드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 나스닥 매도 진입 사인 드립니다. 자, 매도 진입 사인 드리도록 하겠습니다.
체결되었습니다. 확인
진입가
바랍니다.
478.50입니다. 478.50 매도입니다. 매도 진입 사인 드렸습니다.
But for now, if it's federal borrowing costs, that depends on what the Fed's doing in terms of rates.
Citi, appreciate it.
Thanks.
That duration is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and you imagine it might get a whole lot shorter.
Absolutely. And also, though, to Veronica's point, just thinking about the politics of all this.
자, 매도 진입 대응 이어나가도록
Citi is
하겠습니다.
expecting some hotter prints to come in because tariff rates, we're going to see that pass through now, potentially with companies. At the same time, the Fed potentially, they think, is going to be on a cycle of cutting. How political is that think that they're only looking at the employment even though we're getting hotter CPI prints. That's going to be challenging.
Bond yields this morning higher by 3 basis points across the curve, up 3 on 2s to about 373. On 30s on my screen on the Bloomberg at the moment, up 3 also and back through 490. That's the price action. Let's get you an update on stories worldwide. Here is your Bloomberg brief. President Donald Trump taking game at NBC and ABC, saying they are, quote, the worst and most biased networks in history, adding that he would support the FCC in revoking their licenses. Elsewhere, the American Civil Liberties Union saying the Florida Detention Center, known as Alligator Alcatraz is being run illegally by state workers who are holding immigrants off the grid. The ACLU is suing a group of agencies involved in operating the facility. And finally, K-pop Demon Hunters topped the North American box office. According to Variety, the film is projected to gross $18 to $20 million over the weekend. It's a rare win at theatres for Netflix after it released the musical as a one-weekend-only sing-along event.
You're looking at me because you think I'm going.
No, I just have no interest in this whatsoever.
K-pop is cool. It might come up today at the White House, given you have the South Korean president visiting
singing at
President
the
Trump.
movies that I'm just not into at all. Like, people, no. Like the sing-along stuff. What was that with the ABBA movie? What was that, Mamma Mia? And people started singing along to that stuff. No interest at all. All right, up next, setting you up for the day ahead. Plus, we'll catch up with Colin Martin of Schwab as investors price in a September rate cut. From New York, this is Bloomberg.
You've said 25% last year, I believe, of Google's code is AI generated. You have over 180,000 employees right now. Is it half that in the future?
I expect we will grow from our current engineering base even into next year, right? Because it allows us to do more, right? I think the opportunity space is also increasing. I just view this as making engineers dramatically more productive. Getting a lot of the mundane aspects out of what they do, allowing them to spend on higher value-added tasks. But that means it's an accelerator. People will be able to do more, which means maybe we'll create new products, and hence we will need more people. At least in the near term, to me, it looks like we will expand engineering velocity, and that doesn't mean we're constrained in what we will do. We'll end up doing more as a company as well.
The Middle East and Africa regions are home to some of the biggest deals and fastest growth in the world. Vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. I'm Jumana Versace. Join me on opportunities abound. I'm Jumana Versace. Join me on Bloomberg Horizons Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insights shaping the decisions of traders across this exciting region.
You had heightened levels of volatility.
There's still room to maneuver.
Reduce the opportunities.
It allows you to increase significantly your net income.
Every trading day only on Bloomberg.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories.
And we're here, where the action starts in Sydney.
And in Tokyo, get ahead as the global trading day begins.
The Asia Trade, weekdays only on Bloomberg.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Matt Miller at the Circuit de la Sarthe in Le Mans, and this is Bloomberg.
There's an enormous amount of pressure on the Fed right now that cannot be ignored. We haven't seen pressure like this since Johnson and Nixon. It's very significant, and it's more direct. It's more public.
자, 현재 진입권 대응 이어나가도록 하겠습니다. 본장까지 약 40분 앞두고 있습니다. 현재 매도 진입권 조금 더 지켜보도록 하겠습니다.
Central bank independence. I have to say I prefer it public and direct than private and behind closed doors.
Yeah, well, this was the idea around President Nixon, Arthur Burns. They would have these meetings together, but no one knew how overt really Nixon was and direct he was to Arthur Burns and what he wanted to see. This is very transparent. We can all read and see what the president is saying about the Federal Reserve every single day.
We know exactly what we're getting. Bond yields are higher this morning by 2 or 3 basis points across the curve. Equities are lower by 0.3% on the S&P 500, down by about a third also on the Nasdaq 100. As we count you down to the opening bell, here's the trading diary. Today, Fed speak from New York President John Williams. Look out for that. The New York Fed president later on this evening. That's one to watch. As we look ahead to tomorrow, durable goods orders. Wednesday, the big one for earnings, results from Nvidia. Thursday, another round of jobless claims plus a read on GDP. And on Friday, core PCE and UMich consumer sentiment, for whatever that's worth at the moment, which feels like a political poll, a survey.
Right. Remember what Governor Waller said? He said, oh, yeah, that thing, that sentiment.
It's how it's been treated, that thing. Let's stick with that thing. Inflation, the stock rally, retreating this morning as investors eye a September rate decision. Colin Martin of Schwab writing, a soft labour market is in the driver's seat when it comes to monetary policy expectations, but inflation concerns haven't dissipated. Colin joins us now for more. Colin, good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you. What changed for you after Friday?
Not too much. We were already pricing in a September rate cut. I mean, there's all these headlines and the markets go haywire about everything he says and doesn't say. If we go back to June, a majority of the FOMC participants were already expecting this. If we go back a few weeks ago, we were expecting a rate cut and probably a second one in December. It seems more likely now. I'd say Powell stopped short of confirmation, like what we got in 2024, in fact, when he said, this is happening. But the door's clearly open. He mentioned that, we know that he thinks monetary policy is restrictive. It seems like the door's open to kind of ease it a little bit. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think much has changed because I think the Fed will continue to be data dependent going forward.
There appears to be a reaction shift, though, and that's important with regards to the data dependence. There seems to be a decreased sensitivity to inflation and maybe an increased sensitivity to the labour market. Is it fair there's been a bias shift at the Federal Reserve?
I think so, but I think the data supports that. We at Schwab, we kind of had the same shift as well. Leading up to those pretty negative revisions that we got a few weeks ago, almost a month ago now, we thought the labour market was pretty stable with maybe some negative things, some cracks forming underneath the surface. That kind of pulled forward a lot more of those cracks, and maybe it wasn't as stable as we expected. So I think it's fair to focus more on the labor market than inflation. Yes, inflation is still above the Fed's target. It's been above the Fed's target for years. Yes, it's moving away from the target, at least over the past few months. But we're not sure it's going to necessarily reaccelerate from here. I think a lot of that, or some of that, does come from tariffs. But I won't use the T word, but it might be a one-time shift that the Fed might look through a little bit. I think they're still worried that we can see more price increases going forward. But unless we keep getting tariffs on tariffs on tariffs, that rate of change isn't going to be there in perpetuity.
But what makes you so worried about a 4.2% unemployment rate?
Not much. That's something that again, we have shifted our view a little bit. I was looking at that specifically as that sign of stability. I've kind of lost count now because we've shifted a little bit, but I think it's between 4% and 4.2% for 15, 16 months, something like that. It's remarkably stable. And even with those negative revisions, it was still kind of in the top end of that range. I think when you round it a little bit, it ticks a little bit higher. And it was more proof of the low higher environment.
So why are they cutting?
Because I think
they're thinking about cutting.
They're thinking about cutting, haven't done it just yet. I think there's just things that are more concerning that the trend can worsen from here. It looks like if that trend we got over the past few months with non-farm payrolls, maybe that 4.0 to 4.2% range for the unemployment rate, maybe we get 4.3, 4.4, 4.5 over time. I think that's going to be a little bit concerning for Fed officials.
Unleashed a super speculative rally, not just in equities, but in bonds too. We talked a lot about investment-grade credit spreads and multi-decade tights, high-yield spreads, 279 after Friday. How much tighter can credit spreads go in this country?
Well, not much. I mean, they can go. I mean, I've been pretty cautious about it for a while, but spreads have stayed in this really tight range. And if we look at that, we'll say 279 for high yield, all-time low or cyclical low, we'll call it post-pandemic. We're looking at around 2.5%. So just kind of definitionally, maybe we see 20 or 30 basis points lower. I'm concerned, though. We've been cautious for a while.
What are you concerned about?
I'm concerned that I think we're seeing a lot of dynamics with supply and demand, people really reaching for yield, stock market optimism, a lot of demand in the private credit space. And I think when we get all this demand moving into an asset class, I think you lose price discovery, and it can't mask things that are going on underneath the surface forever. And we're seeing, I mean, defaults are still relatively high. They've been hovering, depending on Moody's or S&P, whichever data you want to use, in the 3, 4, 5% area for I think close to 2 years now, and that's well above levels we saw in 2021 when we saw spreads at these lows.
Do you find it odd that the chairman came out on Friday and said, I'm worried about demand? I'm not worried about inflation so much because actually I'm worried more about what's happening with demand, and then we saw spreads grind tighter?
I think, the Fed's view and then the market's just getting optimistic about the potential for rate cuts. We're worried about demand also. If we look at GDP, one of the things that we always focus on is personal consumption. And the first 2 quarters, I think on average, if you put them together, you're looking at around 1% or so annualized. And if we look at the past 3 years, it's closer to 2.5%. So I think that is something that probably is concerning for Fed officials. And we're concerned as well. And that's why we have that sort of defensive bias in terms of not taking too much risk with your portfolio, and the idea that we think yields of all maturities will probably fall a little bit further.
Well, let's get into that defensive posture. Where do you want to be across the yield curve?
자, 현재 매도 진입권 실시간 대응 중에 있습니다. 조금 더 지켜보고
us and everybody else, but
대응 사인 드리도록 하겠습니다.
On the short end, reinvestment risk is clearly here, and if we look at where money market fund yield is right now, or a T-bill,
본장 개장까지 약 35분 앞두고 있습니다. 자, 개장까지 대응 이루어질 수 있는 점 참고 부탁드리겠습니다. 자, 현재 매도 진입권 대응 이어나가도록 하겠습니다.
We still have fiscal concerns, and the term premium is relatively elevated, and we're worried that it can stay elevated given all the trade uncertainty, fiscal policy uncertainty, and the need for higher yields to attract those investors.
Do you see 4% on 10s as almost the floor then? How are you thinking about things? Even though you're going to see this big drop off at the front end, where's the 10-year sitting?
Maybe a little bit below 4, maybe in the 3.75% to 4% range. We kind of give those ranges. If we look at what's going to pull yields significantly lower, we probably need a recession for that. In a recessionary environment, maybe 3.5% or less. But if we just get a moderation, which is kind of what we've seen lately, we think maybe just below 4%, which means a steeper yield curve and probably still attractive yields in our.
Would you expect issuance to tighten up even more? Duration just to shorten from the Treasury, given what you just described?
I think so. We know what Treasury wants to do. We know the concerns that Treasury and the whole administration has about the borrowing costs here, and we know what they can impact. And if we do get a lowering of interest rates because of either the mandate that suggests it, or more people on the committee that are demanding it maybe more vocally, we'll probably see lower short-term rates, and we'll probably see the Treasury continue to take advantage of that.
Colin, it's good to see you. Thanks for dropping by. Colin Martin there of Schwab. That dance between Treasury and the Federal Reserve over the next year, the one to watch without a doubt.
Absolutely, and the president has made it pretty clear. He's like, if we're the ones paying net interest payments bigger than the defense budget, that those rates should be lower as the U.S. government is paying off those bonds.
First day back after vacation, feel good?
Yeah, it's a little sad. It's last week of August.
I know, you've got to take it in, take it slowly. I don't wish away summer. You know how a lot of people here wish away summer after Labor Day, it's sort of over? It's not over. You've got the whole of September.
Yeah, we should enjoy September.
Just
it's a good point.
Embrace September and the warm weather that's still to come. Bramo's doing just that. She's going to enjoy the final week of August. She'll be back with us next week. Conversation continues tomorrow. Peter Chia of Academy Securities will join us. We'll catch up with Marissa Adams of HSBC. We'll speak to Jim Bianco of Bianco Research and the wonderful, the brilliant Torsten of Apollo. Stacked lineup tomorrow. Looking forward to catching up with you. For this morning, bond yields bouncing back by about 2 or 3 basis points across the curve. Equity futures just a little bit softer, negative by 0.3%. From New York City this morning, good morning to you all. Thank you for choosing Bloomberg TV. This was Bloomberg Surveillance. It's the most fascinating time for the global economy in years, and our conversations are front and center.
We're stress testing consequential ideas, and investors around the world are scoring them in real time, helping to translate the policies from Washington into actionable ideas for Wall Street.
It's the morning call you actually want to be a part of.
Separating the signal from the noise, with some fun along the way.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We got to talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
A new level of premium.
Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
The floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
You can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily, only on Bloomberg.
I think people are paying attention now to what we're doing in a way that wasn't happening 5 years ago. I think the convergence, not just of the hardware investments, but the AI investments in particular, have been the real watershed for us in helping people understand why we've always believed having these devices be wearable and having sensors and having context in the world around you has been so important. And it's like, oh yeah, of course, now that you realize there's going to be a potentially super intelligent assistant that's operating there, you want it to have, for free, all the context on what you've heard, what you've seen, what you're doing, so it can help you the most out as you go about your day and try to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So we feel a lot of vindication on that. I think the question is, yeah, will it be us? Will it be a competitor? That depends on our execution and their execution. I have a lot of confidence that the paradigm that we're in right now, which has been stable for a long time, right? The phone that you all have in your pockets now is roughly the same as the phone you had in your pocket 4 or 5 years ago. There's not really a lot of new innovation happening at that scale. There is a lot of things. The phone is the greatest consumer electronic device ever built, and yet there's also a lot of things that we wish it could do better or different. And I think with AI and integrated context with the world around us, that becomes more and more obvious. So I'm very confident that the paradigm will shift in that time frame. And you all know the saying, we get a lot less done in 1 year than we think and a lot more done in a decade. That really is going to be true, I think, when it comes to these shifts.
In case you missed it on the close.
Sweet Green, which has a kind of a similar business model to Kava, they're having some issues, and it's more about just the foot traffic. Maybe the price points are too high, or people have just moved on to other types of ways to feed themselves. What are you seeing?
We're not seeing anything underneath structurally in the business. If anything, we're seeing greater structural strength. In recent years, we've now underpriced CPI by 900 basis points. So again, our value scores continue to improve. We continue to make our food more accessible and really try and mitigate any of the impacts of, say, tariffs and not have to pass along to our guests.
There's been a lot of talk about how do you reimagine stores like this. What do you want your customer to do?
If you're in a hurry, we've got great digital channels. We've got 60 drive-through pickup windows. But if you want a great physical experience, you can have that walk the line experience, see the food, smell the food, interact with our team members. Our mission is to bring heart, health, and humanity to food. So we want to deliver that humanity in the four walls of our restaurants and have a great environment for you to enjoy your Mediterranean meal.
Don't miss the close, live every weekday.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute economic news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Michael McKee in Victor, Idaho, and this is Bloomberg.
A jolt of caffeine can boost its struggling coffee business. Plus, here come more tariffs. Stocks like Wayfair and Lazy Boy are on the move as President Trump targets furniture imports. Danny, what are you watching?
Well, I am watching NVIDIA. You have to, right, Matt? It's the big test of the week. When they release earnings on Wednesday, shares a little bit weaker this morning. Expectations, they are high as traders look for some reason to remain bullish on AI. We could see large moves in big tech. 40% of NVIDIA's revenue comes from other Mag 7 companies, Matt. So it is the risk of the week.
Yeah, definitely an important one to watch, the company to watch this week. This morning, though, Keurig Dr. Pepper has made an $18 billion move on Dutch coffee giant JDE Peet's. This will create the second largest coffee company in the world behind Nestle. You can see that Keurig Dr. Pepper shares are down 8%. The more interesting thing, I think, is that it's going to split its business, Danny, into two. So the soft drinks and energy drinks on one side and the coffee on the other.
Well, let's start with just that. And for more on the deal, we are joined by Bloomberg Managing Editor for Global Business, Shelley Banjo. Shelley, 7 years after the two came together, why would they split after this acquisition?
Yeah, it's essentially an undoing.
자, 현재 보합권에서 약수익권 왔다 갔다 하고 있습니다. 저 안정환의 수익권에서 수익청산 사인드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 목표 수익권까지 천천히 대응이어 나가도록 하겠습니다. 자, 본장 개장까지 약 30분을 앞두고 있습니다. 자, 본장까지 대응 이루어질 수 있는 점 참고 부탁드리겠습니다.
They have had amazing success with brands like Dr. Pepper, which is, I'm told, neck and neck with Pepsi now, only behind Coca-Cola. And they're building with this a huge coffee business. They already own Green Mountain and a number of other brands. They make coffee cups for Krispy Kreme, for McDonald's, for Newman's Own. But I think it's interesting that they're going to split, and at this point, I wonder which one will offer more revenue, because until now, the soda business has been much bigger than their coffee business.
Yeah, I mean, the soda business is doing much better. I mean, coffee is not a great business to be in right now. You've got huge increases on pricing, huge issues with supply, and you know, a number of people that are moving away from some of these coffee brands. And so their Keurig Dr. Pepper, the Dr. Pepper part of the Keurig Dr. Pepper business is actually doing a lot better.
All right, it's a fascinating deal that we're going to continue to talk about. Looks like the coffee company will have $16 billion in revenue, and the soda side $11 billion. And as Shelley mentioned, the prices have been through the roof on the underlying asset in terms of coffee beans, right?
Yeah, and the good news is put it together, break it apart, the bankers get paid. So I'm sure
bankers get paid. All right, Shelley Banjo runs our company coverage here at Bloomberg. Let's get to the stock market's next big test. As Danny was pointing out, NVIDIA earnings Wednesday after the bell. Investors are hoping the results will soothe fears about AI spending and concerns of a brewing tech bubble. Joining us is Bloomberg Tech co-host Caroline Hyde. And wait, was anyone worried about AI spending? Isn't it?
That's so last week.
Were there fears about AI spending?
Was Palantir down for a few days? I mean, Friday seems to have made all of our short-term memory just lose a little bit like that. But we had anxiety and actual impact on retail exuberance around AI purchases of stocks related to it. And I wonder whether this will set the record straight in terms of getting retail back involved, whether we start to see NVIDIA as the key bellwether, almost rivaling the importance of a Fed decision in many ways. Look, it is 3% of global market capitalization in the world. And so when you're thinking about that and the supply chain impacts and the companies that are related, this is going to have a big sentiment check for many. And actually sentiment is, even though we've seen a sell-off in the stocks, analysts have been getting into this stock of late. You're seeing only one sell rating, and in fact, nine analysts alone last week upgraded their price targets for the company. Many are really feeling positive about the amount of ramp that we've seen with the Blackwell in particular. It's going to dial back the China anxiety that we've seen weighing on the stock for a while.
Well, to that point, the chip story, tech story, and politics ever more entwined. We learned Friday after the bell that the U.S. government would be taking that just nearly 10% stake in Intel. They say it's passive, but this is a president who's called the CEO into the White House to talk with them. What does this future of Intel look like with DC having a 10% stake?
And Bloomberg Intelligence is trying to see the pros and the cons in terms of, like, look, there's no governance impact, but realistically, are you going to see a change in demand for Intel's products going forward? Has the government taking a stake taken away any anxiety? Look, this company could end up, pushing itself out of business because it wasn't innovating quickly enough? Could you see the demand, which ultimately Lip-Bu Tan, the CEO, was questioning in the previous earnings? And that's why he said, look, I'm not going to do a build it and they will come. I need to see real demand for my 14A processors for me to keep innovating and pushing along to keep up with rivals. Well, now does the government impact mean that, yes, you will get a Qualcomm and Apple and even an NVIDIA looking for fabs to be made by Intel? Yes, you start to manufacture more in Ohio, but also you drive the innovation there and you make it a US success story. However, if you're a shareholder, are you diluted? And more broadly, does this just change the rules of the game in the way in which you think that Intel had been valued going forward? How much is there an anxiety about the way in which US government impact doesn't always be a fiduciary duty and doesn't always drive profitability?
Or a hope, right? Because President Trump is pretty good at persuading people to do things, right? SoftBank has come in with an additional $2 billion investment. I wonder who else could be supported by the government in this way. Kevin Hassett this morning said that the government may take stakes in other firms.
And it's whether or not you would ever see, they've already tried to push back that you wouldn't see it on a TSMC or a Samsung or a companies that have been persuaded to build it. Exactly, and they're the ones that actually they want to not have to rely on so much. You want to be able to rely on Intel as a US domestic manufacturer rather than TSMC. But what of Micron? What of other companies that have managed to show that they can innovate and they can spend their way to appease the government here in the United States to manufacture more? But who else and what other industry groups? I think this is wholly unprecedented. We are not in a time of war. We are not in a time of financial crisis. And yet still the national security impediment of global chip manufacturing and AI race, it makes it vindicated in some way with the US government.
Yeah, I thought Bernstein put it well, though. Yes, they can use the money, but they also need customers, to the point that you're making, Caroline. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Bloomberg Tech co-host Caroline Hyde. Now, we're also going to get a number of retail earnings this week. They include Gap, Kohl's, Dollar General, Best Buy, and Dick's. Bloomberg consumer editor Emily Cohen joins us now. Emily, we heard from the giant last week, Walmart, who was able to keep prices low, but talked about tariffs increasing their prices every single week. If we get some of these smaller ones, are they going to be as resilient as we heard from Walmart?
I think that's the key question here. I think we learned a few things last week. We learned that the big retailers that can afford to keep prices low, that can negotiate good deals with their suppliers, are doing so. Also, a lot of these stores imported a lot of these goods before the tariffs went into effect. So what they saw in the last quarter is consumers are resilient. Also, where there are deals, shoppers will follow. So those are the kinds of themes that we're looking for this week. Are these retailers passing along the cost of tariffs yet, or is that still to come? And how are shoppers feeling? How are they doing? What are they gravitating towards? And those are the big questions.
Right, because the outlooks we get now are going to be all about back to school. For a lot of these companies, that's huge, right? Best Buy, for example. And the question isn't, I think, only are they going to pass along costs in terms of raised prices, but are they going to be offering discounts? Who's going to discount the most into September?
Yeah, and we heard from Walmart last week. They saw a strong back-to-school shopping season. Why? Probably because they had the best deals. So we'll be looking to see who else is touting those same wins or who else might have lost to other retailers.
Aren't you excited?
Yes.
Another week of sweet retail earnings? Emily Cohen runs our retail coverage for us here at Bloomberg News. Let's get a quick check on what's going on in terms of futures after rock and roll Friday, really. We were up more than 1.5 on the S&P 500, almost 2% on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We added like 900 points.
Yeah, best day since May.
On the Dow on Friday. Now futures are down a little bit, but you can understand maybe a little bit of profit taking there. Also, maybe a bit of a reality check in terms of what's going on with the jobs market versus inflation.
Yeah, but we are 0.1% away from all-time highs. Kind of a bummer not to get there today and to see a little bit of
you never know what happens throughout the day.
That is true. Yeah. We certainly could get a turnaround. This not helping, though, coming up on the show. Furniture stocks are plunging. The Trump administration investigating imports as part of its tariff regime. So we'll have that for you next. You're watching Bloomberg Open Interest.
Countdown to the Opening Bell is brought to you by Crypto.com, trusted by 150 million users globally.
At Morgan Stanley, old school hard work meets bold new thinking. To help you see untapped possibilities and relentlessly work with you to make them real.
earned my degree online at Southern New Hampshire University.
It's possible to raise a family, to pursue other things, and still further your education.
And you can do it too, from all over the country.
I live in Massachusetts. I live in Texas.
I live in California.
I live in Pennsylvania.
I'm from Florida. I'm from Virginia.
In North Carolina.
In St. Louis.
I'm from Tennessee.
And I'm from Georgia.
Regardless of where you live across the country, earn your degree at SNHU.
Visit snhu.edu.
자, 현재 약보합권에 진입하였습니다. 자, 본장까지 약 20분을 앞두고 있습니다. 조금 더 지켜보고 수익권까지 대응해 나가도록 하겠습니다.
This cybersecurity app will block web trackers and malware-infected sites. It will also encrypt your internet traffic without losing a smooth connection. Get the deal now.
천천히 대응해 나가도록 하겠습니다.
Cybersecurity built for every day.
Never thought this would happen. We got you.
When disaster threatens to put production weeks behind, call the team prepared to be there in minutes. Serve Pro, like it never even happened.
When I started Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses, I had no idea what I was doing. But GoDaddy Aero does, using AI to build a logo, website, and social content. So I can let the world know if your goggles ain't Goggins, they don't belong on your noggins.
Why should you trade options rather than stocks? Because they offer higher returns, are cost-effective, and can actually reduce risk. Learn how in our new book. Get a free copy today at itsnotanoption.com. Itsnotanoption.com.
Losing the fear of looking foolish comes with age.
Who did you steal him from?
Losing your way in your own home doesn't. Confusion with time and place may be a sign of Alzheimer's.
Mom, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine.
Early detection gives you and your loved one time to plan for the future. Learn the warning signs of Alzheimer's.
Let's get now to high interest. Look what's making headlines around the world. The buyout firm Thoma Bravo will buy the call center software maker Verint Systems for $1.23 billion in cash. That's a 10% premium for the company. Thoma Bravo plans to combine it with another portfolio company that provides workplace management software. The deal is expected to close by the end of the year. And Vornado Realty Trust will buy an office condominium above Saks Fifth Avenue's flagship department store here in New York City for $218 million. Vornado expects to close the purchase of that property next month. By the way, it's 75% vacant right now. Furniture stocks are on the move in the pre-market after President Trump announced a tariff investigation on furniture coming into the U.S. That's hitting companies like Restoration Hardware and Wayfair that import a lot of their products. Furniture manufacturers with a large U.S. footprint like Lazy Boy and Ethan Allen are having a different reaction, obviously gaining because they will have less price competition, Danny.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone's going to have Lazy Boys. That's the future. For more on the impact on Wayfair in particular, as you showed, Matt, plunging in the pre-market trade, we're joined by Bloomberg Intelligence e-commerce analyst Poonam Goyal. I'm looking at FA screen on the Bloomberg terminal, Poonam, and it looks like about just under 40% of Wayfair's suppliers are located outside of the United States. Just how painful would a furniture-specific sectoral tariff be for Wayfair?
It would be painful because prices will have...
From the beating heart of global finance, economics, and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this a new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacroix, and this is The Pulse, every weekday only on Bloomberg.
In case you missed it, on Bloomberg Open Interest.
When we look at our portfolio, we see an IPO pipeline that's the biggest since it's been in 2021.
In M&A and IPOs, we've actually had close to record performances in that space. We're going to have an interesting year.
We're having a lot more conversations around putting dates on calendars. I think we could see a very active second half of the year.
Don't miss Open Interest live weekdays.
Offering similar merchandise on your platform. And the one thing about being a marketplace is that consumers, it's not like buying milk, right? If the price of milk goes up, the consumer notices. But if you launch a new product, the consumer doesn't have a place to compare. How much was this before? So when you bring fashion into the mix, there is some price acceptance when it goes up through quality or just.
자, 본장까지 약 13분을 앞두고 있습니다.
What are the ballpark figures that you're hearing in terms of tariffs? I mean, how much does the U.S. want to extract from this industry?
I don't know the answer to that. I think your guess is as good as mine. We know there's a 20% tariff.
자, 예상 조항 이탈 시에는 청산 사인들이 예정입니다. 사인에 집중 부탁드리며 본장까지 대응 나가도록 하겠습니다.
Threshold because we're already there in most countries, but we haven't heard any numbers just yet.
So we don't know what it will be yet, and consumers are probably seeing this and also unsure. What kind of pull forward effect could we have then?
I think there will be some pull forward. I think there has been pull forward all year, quite honestly, which is why retail sales to some extent have held up so strong through the first half of the year. That said, there are deals. Like, when I go onto Wayfair right now, the Labor Day deals, they're pretty aggressive. So for an industry that's worried about prices going up on furniture, they're still offering quite significant deals to get the consumer to shop. And we do think the consumer has an appetite to still shop right now.
All right, Poonam, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Bloomberg Intelligence's Poonam Goyal on Wayfair stock sinking. One stock that's rallying in the pre-market is Intel. Matt, this just out from President Trump on Truth Social saying, I paid $0 for Intel. It is worth approximately $11 billion. All of that goes to the USA, going on to say, I love seeing their stock price go up. It begs the question, is if Intel is giving away this for $0, what are they getting in return? They say it's going to be a passive stake, but just how passive would you likely see the government?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's already called for the resignation of the CEO. Then he had a meeting with the CEO at the White House. Now they're doing this deal. And of course, the U.S. is putting billions of dollars in the hands of Intel. So it's not $0. It's just that it comes from President Biden's CHIPS Act that President Trump is using. Very interesting stuff and really interesting discussions. Have been had around that all last week, and we'll continue all this week. Let's take a look at what's going on in futures, because we had a big rally on Friday and we're down this morning.
Yeah, it was the biggest rally since May for this equity market, and we take a breather this morning. We are down about 0.33% across the indices. Matt, as I mentioned, we are 0.1% away from an all-time high, a dovish injection from Powell that was surprising to many people, allowing this market to rally. At least it was on Friday, not necessarily today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're still looking, though, at like 85, 86% chances of a rate cut in September. That's what that rally was all about. That hasn't changed much. Coming up, we're going to talk to Keith Lerner of Truist. He upgrades U.S. small caps, which had an absolutely massive rally. I think the Russell was up 3.9% on Friday. He joins the show next. This is Bloomberg Open Interest.
Countdown to the opening bell is brought to you by Crypto.com, trusted by 150 million users globally.
At Principal Asset Management, we see things from a different point of view. With depth in distinct capabilities, our investment teams uncover opportunities across asset classes. Together, your vision and our depth of perspective helps you implement all-weather strategies. It's this depth that powers portfolios and sets you up for success. Principal Asset Management. Actively invested.
Only the ServiceNow platform connects every corner of your business, putting AI to work for people.
HR?
Yeah.
IT?
Yeah.
R&D?
Yep.
OMG?
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That's the department I work in.
All right. Enough of that.
My heart is yours, dear, and your nights are only lonely, and I promise this forever. Just take my hand. My heart is yours, dear, and just take my hand, darling.
You have big visions of what you want to achieve in the next few years. What is the plan the next 5 years?
It's a very ambitious plan. I have a friend who once told me that the World Cup was like an IPO for Qatar, and I believe this was, thanks to God, that this was a very successful IPO, and it's been oversubscribed, and we have seen the growth in many sectors after that. Basically, Qatar is trying to work on a transformation plan where we transform our economy into more being diversified, with a diversified base internally. And we've been talking about this for the last 25 years, and we've been working toward that objective.
Truist upgrading U.S. small caps to neutral from less attractive. Co-CIO and Chief Market Strategist Keith Lerner cites valuations, improved earnings trends, and technical signals. Similarly, RBC Capital Markets notes that small caps tend to outperform larger stocks when economic growth is below average. Truist Keith Lerner joins us now. Keith, how much of this is about fundamentals versus Friday getting dovish injection from Jay Powell?
Yeah, well, Danny, great to be with you and Matt. It's a combination of many factors. We follow a weighted the evidence approach, and we already saw before Friday things started to change. So the first condition is we know they've underperformed by a lot. Look at the last 3 years on a rolling basis to large caps. They've underperformed the S&P 600 by about, by about 40%. So you have a condition of being oversold. Valuations have been cheap. That hasn't mattered. But what's been different over the last few months, we're starting to see those earning trends, forward earning estimates move higher, and that's pretty broad-based. We can speak more about that. You throw on top of that the rate cut, which I think on the margin is positive, and also somewhat underappreciated is the One Big Beautiful Bill had some real cash incentives for tax rates for these higher leverage, more interest rate sensitive names as well. And then finally, the technicals. The underlying trends are positive on an absolute basis, and then on a relative basis, we saw a breakout on Friday. You put that all in the mix, at least on the margin, we would say you should be somewhat less negative. And even though we had a big Friday up move, if you zoom out a bit, they've still underperformed by a very wide margin the last few years.
So when we talk about the Russell 2000, for example, I always hear that only about half of them make money. I'm not sure if that's 60% or 40%, but in that ballpark, right? Where do you see the quality? Where do you see the money makers inside that index? Is it financials? Is it industrials? I mean, who's doing well?
Yeah, well, and you're right. And that's why I think longer term, we still like large cap, that secular technology theme in general. But on the margin, I think we have to acknowledge a shift in that way of the evidence. And we've kind of focused more on the S&P 600, which tends to have a earnings quality and a factor to it. But to your point, what's interesting, when we look below the surface, even though it's a lot less weight, small cap tech and communication services are seeing those earnings move up. But also the two biggest sectors within the index, financials and industrials, are also moving high. I think on the financials, probably a beneficiary somewhat of a little bit of steeper curve. And let's not forget, we probably will have a bit more of a pickup in M&A, which should also be supportive for at least a trade in small caps.
Well, Keith, even just that, I mean, it's a small cap index that feels like it's been hollowed out by private capital, about small companies staying private for longer or even being taken private. There was another Thoma Bravo one just today. Is the quality of the small cap index, has it been declining?
자, 본장까지 약 4분 앞두고 있습니다. 본장 이후에 대응 이어나가도록 하겠습니다. 본장 개장 이후에 대응 이어나가도록 하겠습니다.
You know, not only is private equity buying these companies are staying private, and when they come to the market, they're coming when they're bigger. And also, your team over at Bloomberg did a great analysis with the Mag 7 and showed that they have purchased or had M&A or taken over these smaller companies by a clip of about 800 companies since they've come public. So you think about that, and then also with small caps, once they hit a threshold, they get moved up. So that's great. But once you become a winner, you kind of cut those winners. So again, that's why longer term we think secular growth in large caps makes sense. But on the margin, especially with how much outflows we've seen out of small caps, we think it makes sense for a little bit of catch up.
All right, Keith, stay with us. We have much more to discuss, including some of the large caps that you mentioned. Keith Lerner of Truist. Quick.
I'm David Weston. Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. We go on the road for a look at what lies behind the headlines of today and what will likely be the headlines tomorrow.
We need more transparency.
Oil and gas is still important.
They said every citizen should be investing in the market.
Accelerate progress in all fields of science.
Watch Wall Street Week right here on Bloomberg. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question.
It's a very good question.
자, 분량까지 약 1분을 앞두고 있습니다. 대장 이후 사인에 접근드리겠습니다.
Bloomberg Television, top experts, great questions.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute energy news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Joanna Bersace in Vienna, and this is Bloomberg.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Sherrian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney, where the trading day begins. We're here in the center of all the action to get you set up with the numbers, news, and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
The demand is indeed recovering. We've been waiting for this moment.
The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. Weekdays only on Bloomberg TV. Context changes everything.
Moments away from the start of trading on this Monday morning, post-Jackson Hole. This is Bloomberg Open Interest. I'm Matt Miller. We saw big gains after Powell's speech at the Grand Teton, and now we're looking, giving a little bit of that up. The S&P was up, I think, 1.6% on Friday, down about 0.2%. This is just the futures, right? Down about a third on the NASDAQ, down about a third on the Russell. You hear the opening bells. We see at the New York Stock Exchange, Brillia ringing the bell. I'm not sure. It's a maker of women's intimate apparel, and it's like almost all dudes.
A lot of men there.
Like, what do they know about shapewear? Maybe maybe a lot. It's the 90s, you know. And there at the NASDAQ market site, you see SAFX ringing the opening bell. They just went public via SPAC that had absolutely cratered, and it hasn't done great since then, but we wish them luck. In terms of stocks to watch, Danny, we have the big one reporting this week.
We do on Wednesday. It's going to be NVIDIA. And Matt, this is a big risk. We've gotten through Powell. We got through Jackson Hole. So this is the next thing to earmark. It is unchanged, but expectations, they are high, now pushing higher. As traders look for reasons to remain bullish on AI, we could see large moves in big tech. 40% of NVIDIA's
자, 수익 청산 사인드리도록 하겠습니다. 수익 청산합니다. 수익 청산입니다. 수익 청산 후에 다음 진입비율 사인드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 수익 청산하도록 하겠습니다. 수익 청산 사인드립니다. 자, 5개 학기는 약 200만 원 수익 청산 사인드렸고요. 현재 캡처 오류로 인해서 사진이 좀 말씀드린 금액과 다를 수 있는 점 참고 부탁드리겠습니다. 자, 수익 청산 사인드립니다.
주문 청산이 완료되었습니다.
And the other will have Dr. Pepper and Ghost, which I'm told is popular in terms of energy drinks, 7-Up, and a number of other Snapple, obviously.
What is Ghost?
Ghost is like an energy drink. The ones I know, because I'm old, are like Red Bull and Monster, right? But then the kids, like Shonali was always drinking Celsius. And I guess Ghost is one of those competitors.
Okay, I mean, it's too bad it's not like Celsius where it has those magical ones that were actually high
자,
noon.
6차 진입비율 대기하도록 하겠습니다. 6차 진입비율 대기하도록 하겠습니다.
Yeah, and they had booze and it makes them all that much more exciting.
All right, so maybe Ghost could do that. Anyway, we're back with Truist CIO, co-CIO, and Chief Market Strategist Keith Lerner. And Keith, we got through the small cap discussion and we're done with that. Let's take a longer term, maybe more risk-averse look at some of the large cap stocks. Danny just pointed out that.
자, 이어서 바로 진입 사인드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 매도 진입하도록 하겠습니다. 매도 5개 약입니다. 자, 진입가 463.00입니다. 463.00 매도 진입입니다.
How much actual cash capex is being spent?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a great point. These companies
매도 진입 사인드렸습니다. 자, 매도 진입 대응해 나가도록 하겠습니다.
But the main thing, we're focused on is the earning trend. So we are, somewhat concerned about all that spending. But so far, when we look at the Mag 7, we're still seeing those earning trends move up and then moving up at a stronger pace relative to the overall market. And when you think more broadly about tech, what leads to outperformance? It's that. I mean, valuations have rebounded. Think about the technology sector was down to about a 21, 22 multiple at the lows. Now we're back up to 30. So those earnings have to come through. We're still overweight tech. We think they will come through. I do think, though, that road band for tech got stretched. We were up 50% in about 4 months. That's the most since 2000. So maybe a bit more of a chop here, but I think longer term it's hard to bet against tech as long as those earning trends are moving higher, which they still are, and deserve the benefit of the doubt.
Keith, you started out by mentioning how these companies are becoming asset heavy. I think that's one of the most interesting turns. As the hyperscalers build out data centers, need energy to support their various operations in AI. Does that change how you look at a Microsoft, a Meta, a Google, what have you, and how you value them? Because the prospect of them being asset light used to be a huge beneficiary, and why you used to see and still do valuations so high.
Yeah, no, I guess if you said, hey, Keith, what's on the concern? You're still positive on tech. What's the concern? It's that, but when do we see that filter into the earnings number and start to see earning trends start to change? And just so far, we're not seeing signs of those earning trends. And we still think, as we think about the AI cycle, there's probably a pretty long tailwind for it as a whole. And then I also think about not just about tech. Well, in an environment where the macro uncertainty is still relatively large, what's a better area, which has better growth prospects, and it's hard to really identify something, better than tech at this point. So again, we'll stick with it, but we've been expecting a bit more of a chop long term, and we'll be looking at those capex versus earning trends in the next few quarters to see if anything changes. But so far, we haven't seen it.
Keith, if you're an investor that missed the AI leaders, and it's granted it's been a few years, so you really would have had to sleep through it, but how do you rebalance, especially when we're coming into earnings for NVIDIA?
I think the one thing is you should zoom out a bit, right? I mean, I know we'll have all the attention on NVIDIA the day before, the day after, but if you zoom out and think about, what is that earning profile going forward? Where are we in the AI cycle? I don't know that would make any real changes. We're still overweight this sector. I mean, if someone's gotten way stretched, you may kind of pull back a little bit, but it's an area of the market that I think we want to stick with. And then if you're in the S&P 500 itself, with tech and tech plus, you're above 45% as a whole. So, at this point, we're not making a lot of shifts. We're just having people be realistic that it's often 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and we just can't go linear the whole time. Going back to even like NVIDIA, look this year, the stock's up about 30%. The forward earning estimates are up about 25%. So a little bit of multiple expansion, but you are seeing that earnings are actually also moving at a good clip higher.
Keith, is it also possible to be bearish at all on risk as long as we have that pivot, the dovish pivot intact from Powell, as long as he's flagging downside risks to unemployment and opening the door to September? Is it possible to push back on a market after getting that?
Sure, and I don't, my big picture is, the rate cuts on the margin are positive, but it's not the main driver. I mean, think about the market this year. We're up double digits and the Fed hasn't cut. So you want to keep that door open, but I don't think it's the most important thing. I think those earnings are actually the most important. We just had a great earnings season just recently, and then we've surprised most of this year. I think to your point, though, the biggest risk to this market is expectations. We have the PCE report on Friday. The employment report after Labor Day is going to be also very important. And we know valuations are high and credit spreads are extremely tight. So that is the risk for the overall market. So I don't think at this time you get more bullish than you were over the last few months. But at this point, we think the trend deserves the benefit of the doubt. And if we get those pullbacks, well, at this point, we'd be playing it as opportunities. But again, I mean, it's not like everything is perfect.
Yeah, I got to say, Ed Yardeni would probably agree with what you just said, Keith, given he doesn't expect a rate cut, but thinks earnings will propel the market higher still. Keith, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Truist co-CIO and Chief Market Strategist, Keith Lerner. Now, we are about 7 minutes into your trading day today, and we are moving decisively lower. What's bringing us there? It is tech. Man, a painful day for Palantir. Those shares down 4.3%. It is the biggest dragger on this S&P.
손절하도록 하겠습니다. 손절
It's the
사인들입니다.
Mag 7s. It is Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, AMD. It is all a tech flavor that's in the biggest loser column. By the way, 338 stocks are down this morning, 161 to the upside. For some reason, Alphabet and Netflix are still rallying, so not all tech is doing poorly, but you will see in the sectors this morning, it is
주문
also tech
청산이
that is one of the
완료되었습니다.
worst. If you look at the GRR screen on your Bloomberg terminal, Infotech down 1/3%. You do have 3 industries into the
손절로
green
7차
this morning,
진입을 되도록
and that's
하겠습니다.
real estate, industrial, so a little bit of kind of a bond proxy flavor to what's going on. But Matt, it really just has the feeling after Friday's rally, the best day since May, this is simply a breather. It doesn't necessarily look like the bullish trend has been broken.
Yeah, not much of a dip really to buy, at least not yet. Obviously, things change throughout the trading day. When Romaine comes on at the close, it looks often a lot different than it does right now. Coming up, NVIDIA down less than 1%, and it's weighing on the S&P still because it's a $4.3 trillion company. NVIDIA expected to move more than 5% after earnings on Wednesday. We'll discuss how we know that and what that means with Mandeep Singh of Bloomberg Intelligence. This is Open Interest.
The opening bell is brought to you by Crypto.com, trusted by 150 million users globally.
Before the 12 driver assist systems.
자, 매수 진입 사인 되도록 하겠습니다. 자, 매수 5개야.
체결되었습니다.
진입가 501.25입니다. 501.25. 자, 매수 5개야. 진입하도록 하겠습니다.
To deliver the world's greatest vehicles. The 7-passenger Mercedes-Benz GLS. Even standing still, it's moving forward.
It's odd how, in an instant, things can transform. Slipping out of balance into free fall. I'm glad I found stability amidst it all. Gold. Standing the test of time.
자, 매수 5개야. 501.25입니다.
A little something, Dad?
Hold up. Walt rolled his 401k account into an Empower IRA and planned for times like this. I'm for Team Splurge.
Thanks, Grandpa.
Get good at money so you can be a little bad. Empower.
I earned my degree online from Southern New Hampshire University. When it came to colleges, I just couldn't find the right fit. I know so many people would say, like, I almost finished school, but I dropped out. When I saw, like, how much SNHU cost, I was like, I could actually afford this. Going to online school, it's a big step. When Southern New Hampshire University says that they can get you to that finish line, they get you to the finish line. You can't say he can't do it, because I did it. Go to snhu.edu.
I need a truck for all this.
All right, Auto Trader, let's find him a ride to fit all his stuff. Fire up Auto Intelligence.
Sweet.
Uh-oh, he threw the ball! Auto Intelligence. Woo! What a ride. Stock investors, learning to use options could improve your returns when stocks rise and turn losing stocks into winning trades. Our new book can show you how.
I got the book and I read it in a weekend, and it's just like, wow.
On a measurable level, I'm being successful. I have a couple stocks, but I don't have many of them anymore. It's all options for me.
I highly recommend everyone gets John and Pete's book because there's nothing else out there like it.
Get your free copy today at itsnotanoption.com. That's itsnotanoption.com.
I wonder if you know that I want the best for you. But how long will you fight solo? I wonder if you know that we can get help. Not wondering anymore. Love, your mind.
This is Open Interest. You're looking live at the Principal Room. Coming up, an interview with Jeff Thomas, NASDAQ's Chief Revenue Officer and Global Head of Listings. It's at 10:30 a.m. New York time. This is Bloomberg.
Let's get you some top calls, some of the analyst action to focus in on this morning. First up, American Eagle getting clipped, great pun, at Bank of America to a sell because of tariff pressures. Analysts there noting that the environment is so bearish that not even its Sydney Sweeney campaign will be able to lift the pressures. Can you imagine? Things are so dire that Sydney Sweeney can't save you. Next up, Alaska Air. That's getting upgraded at Raymond James. Analysts citing a positive demand trend and say that the stock is at an attractive level. Shares still off this morning, though. And finally, Lazard, they're getting an upgrade to buy at KBW. The analysts there highlighting that improved deal flow in the U.S. and Europe. Those shares up 2 1/3.
We published a story recently about the explosion of robotic companies and innovation in China. I think we said there's something like 50 or 60 robotic startups in China. Are we behind, and should we be concerned about that?
I think as far as the state of innovation, no. Most of those robots aren't built for work, for the things that, which is the entry point for these robots today. They can do some interesting things. A lot of times, it's backflips or making coffee or something, but not really useful work. These robots can pick up to 50 pounds on our next generation. So they're great for the education of robotics, getting people interested. But as far as humanoids, they've got to check that safety box before they can come into any of the facilities here. And that's a big bar that we haven't seen much of out of the Chinese robots.
Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We got to talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
A new level of premium.
Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
The floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
You can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily, only on Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories. Insight with Haslinda Anand, only on Bloomberg.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg.
That perspective, not being able to sell S20s does have an impact on NVIDIA's future.
We said before the break in the tease that this could move the shares up or down 5%, the earnings report. I want to just show our viewers how we figured that out. On the Bloomberg terminal, you can type EE, and if you want, you can type EE space SURP, and it gives you really cool information, including here you can see what they've posted in the previous earnings report, and then the a percentage change in the share price. The implied move, one-day move after earnings is 5.82%. How seriously do you take this data, Mandeep?
I mean, if you're trading this stock, you take this data seriously. If you're a long-term investor, all you care about is the trajectory of estimate revisions, the fundamentals, and that's where, as I said, it is a multi-year investment cycle. It's just, is it going to compound at 20% or 30% or 10, 15%? And that will have a bearing on what multiple you put on the stock.
Just to go back to the politics, not to harp on it, but also on Friday, we learned that the U.S. would be taking a 10% stake in Intel. It's supposed to be passive, but could we get to a place where things like where NVIDIA chips are built, where other chip makers look, is going to increasingly be Intel, that you feel that pressure from the U.S. government?
Not yet. I think, I mean, right now they took a stake, and to my mind, it's a good thing for Intel, you know, even though the existing shareholders did get diluted by 10%. But I think the positive is the administration really wants, you know, the local chip manufacturing companies to be successful, and Intel is the biggest company. So from that perspective, I can imagine Intel probably getting some orders, not of the highest end, you know, advanced node chips, but probably CPUs. They still have the largest market share. So they may not cede as much share to AMD as they were doing, you know, in the last few quarters. So from that perspective, I do think it's a positive development.
All right, Mandeep, great to have you here, and we'll obviously be talking to you probably more about this tomorrow, and then on Wednesday, and then we'll bring you back Thursday morning for sure. Mandeep Singh runs our tech coverage for us at Bloomberg Intelligence. Coming up, Keurig Dr. Pepper gives its coffee business a boost. Details of the $18 billion deal to buy JDE Peet's next. This is Bloomberg Open Interest.
The Principal Room, brought to you by Principal Asset Management. Specialized expertise, unique perspectives, optimized results. Principal Asset Management. Actively invested. Learn more at principalam.com.
Your client's road to retirement starts with confidence, knowing you're working with an industry leader. At Principal Asset Management, we harness data-driven insights to help you navigate today's markets for tomorrow's outcomes. And with decades of expertise, we can guide you on a path to stronger retirement portfolios. Principal Asset Management. Actively invested.
Comcast Business Advanced Networking and Security Solutions help turn businesses into logistics mastering, supply chain transforming, seamlessly restocking, frictionless paying, poke bowl ordering, cyber securing, mobile access granting, data managing. Welcome to the worlding modern businesses. Powering the engine of modern business, Comcast Business.
Don't stay too late.
I'll try.
Friday night, closing the books. Just a few more hours. That's not true. $120 for what? It's gonna need some coffee. Uh-oh. Who authorized this? Did we pay this twice? Well, hello. Did Ramp just autocode all the invoices? All the receipts are here. Boom, boom, boom. Yes. Love closing the books on time. Ramp. Love finance.
Small business owners, you got to stop doing what you're doing. Why? Because bookkeeping sucks. You shouldn't be doing it yourself. So go to Zendu.com, and what you're going to get there is a trusted financial partner, so you can do what you do best. Run your business. Zendu.com.
This is Bloomberg Open Interest. I'm Matt Miller. Let's get a look at what's going on with stocks on the day, the first trading day after Jackson Hole. We see drops compared to the gains we saw on Friday. S&P 500 trading, well, it's down, but still at 64.52. I think the all-time high is 64.68, so we're not that far off. The NASDAQ 100 down about 0.4%, losing a little bit more ground because Intel is off. Take a look here. Intel, okay, it's only off 0.25%, but it's a $4.3 trillion stock. It's the biggest weight on the S&P. I think it's worth 4% of all equities on planet Earth. So it's pretty big. Intel is now down 1/3%, even after news that President Trump and the United States government has got a 10% stake in Intel. Trump tweeted today that he paid $0 for an $11 billion company, but really he paid about $11 billion for it. Wayfair is down right now, as is Restoration Hardware, because the president is talking about furniture tariffs, and these guys import a lot of the stuff they sell from overseas. Verint Systems is off right now, and this is a company that just got bought by Thoma Bravo. So maybe we saw the premium last week. I'm not really sure, but it was a $1 billion deal, and it's now falling. And then Keurig Dr. Pepper is down as well. That makes a lot of sense because they paid $18 billion for JDE Pete's Standing.
Yeah, by the way, on Verint, it was up 20% in the pre-market on rumors of the deal. The deal premium is barely different than where it closed on Friday, so maybe that's why you see some of the disappointment. But Matt, let's get more on Keurig Dr. Pepper, because the CEO there sees the acquisition that you were just talking about as an opportunity to, quote, create a global coffee giant. Joining us now is Kenneth Shea, Senior Consumer Products Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Ken, so they're going to put the companies together and then break them apart between coffee and the beverage business. Why do it?
Yeah, hi, Danny. Well, essentially, I think from a Keurig Dr. Pepper shareholder point of view, what it does is address the current drag that the Keurig coffee business is placing on the company, quite frankly. You know, this is a business that's being challenged right now, you know, higher green coffee prices. You got tariffs coming in from Brazil, exacerbating that problem. Cool demand for, you know, at-home brewing. All those things are conspiring to have kind of a subdued second half and maybe beyond for that business. So I think the company probably tried to, you know, seek offers for it to sell it. They didn't say that. I don't know it. It makes reasonable sense. But what they're trying to do now is, instead of doing that and perhaps getting a low multiple doing it, they're teaming it up with JDE Peet's, which is basically the #2 global brewer. And they're selling it as a, you know, synergistic transaction that also helps it divest its Keurig business on a tax-free basis.
Yo, coffee prices have been through the roof. I mean, we saw a little bit of a dip, but if we were to graph the price of a coffee bean, I think we'd be near an all-time high, and it looks like a hockey stick, the most recent rise. Is this the time to do this kind of consolidation?
I think it is. I think it is. I think this coffee price increase has been an elongated one over the last few years. Granted, it's been somewhat volatile, but the trend is clearly going up. These compounded price increases for this category are much higher than most other categories for non-alcoholic beverages. And, you know, there's some evidence to suggest that consumers of cold brew coffee, for instance, are moving away to energy drinks as their caffeine source. So things like that are occurring, and Keurig is very aware of it, and so it's taking action.
Yeah, Ken, I was going to say, I mean, neither Matt or me drink coffee. Apparently, everybody drinks matcha lattes right now. How quickly can Keurig and JDE Peet's adapt to quickly changing consumer in just less than a minute here, Ken?
It's going to create an opportunity for them JDP, to get into the U.S. and to bring some innovation, more innovation to the brewers, to the home brewing business. At the same time, it can leverage some of the know-how from KDP to their non-U.S. operations. So there really are some opportunities here for that entity. Having said that, I think the cold beverage side of KDP is really the crown jewel. Higher margins, faster growth.
Dr. Pepper, so delicious also. Ken, thanks so much for joining us. Ken Shea there of Bloomberg Intelligence. He covers this industry for us. Coming up in the next hour, Brooke May of Evans May Wealth on the market impact of NVIDIA earnings. We'll talk to her about M&A as well. Then NASDAQ Chief Revenue Officer Jeff Thomas joins us to talk about IPOs. They've had the best first half since 2021, and we're going to talk alternative assets and retirement accounts with ICI CEO Eric Pan. We got a packed show for you, so stay tuned. This is Bloomberg Open Interest.
The single best investment opportunity you see in the world, regardless of industry or geography. Why, and again, how are you making it available to your clients?
현재 수익권 진입하였습니다. 조금 더 지켜보고 목표 수익권까지 진행해 나가도록 하겠습니다.
Companies and use AI is going to transform. Also, the issue of jobs. What do we do with jobs? Because there's no question. You look at things that are customer service oriented, and the AI is so much more efficient. As we look at across all these different opportunities, what we really like is data centers in the U.S. And the one thing that we know is that AI is just going to create this enormous demand for data and this even growing opportunity for cloud computing. So for us, owning data centers for 20, 30, 50 years, we're going to have a limitation on power in the U.S. There's no question over the next 20 years, the technology will change for chips. It'll become more competitive.
수익 청산 사인되도록 하겠습니다. 수익 청산 후에 재진입 사인되도록 하겠습니다. 수익 청산하도록 하겠습니다.
Technology refresh over the next 20 years. But the one thing we know is you're going to need data centers, you're going to need power, you're going to need cooling to support all this growth in the cloud. So we look at them as long-term bonds.
자, 8차 진입뷰 얘기하도록 하겠습니다. 8차 진입뷰 얘기하도록 하겠습니다.
Taking you from the U.S. markets close to the overnight session in Asia, we'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart Europe's trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to
다시 한번 매수 진입 사인되도록 하겠습니다. 자, 매수 5개야. 진입 사인입니다.
확인 바랍니다.
주니까 515.25입니다.
And we're back with more episodes of our show, The Deal.
The theme of this season, On the Road. We're bringing you more behind-the-scenes conversations with the biggest names in sports, business, and culture, like Melody Hobson.
I started to study women's sports like an 11-year-old studies baseball statistics, and I got dangerous in seeing up arrows.
Susie Wolf.
When you're competing, you're not thinking about any fear or any worries of what could happen.
Josh Harris.
You can't do a good deal with a bad person.
Jay Batt.
At the end of the day, there's never been a better time to be a student athlete.
And more. Stay tuned.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics, and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg.
CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez.
Mr. Abrego Garcia was taken into custody by ICE this morning.
His attorney confirming Kilmar Abrego Garcia was arrested after surrendering at an ICE office in Baltimore today. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says he's now being processed for deportation to Uganda after refusing to plead guilty to human trafficking. Abrego Garcia spoke to supporters outside through an interpreter.
I want to tell you guys something.
Dios está con nosotros. Dios nunca nos dejará. Dios hace justicia a toda la injusticia que han hecho.
God will bring justice to all of the injustice that we are suffering.
Abrego Garcia was released from jail in Tennessee Friday, months after he was mistakenly deported to prison in El Salvador. His attorneys filed a new lawsuit this morning demanding a full trial before he's sent anywhere outside the U.S. An Israeli attack on one of the last remaining hospitals in Gaza. Health officials there say at least 20 people were killed, among them several journalists. The BBC's Yolande Nell from Jerusalem.
Footage shows smoke rising up after the main hospital in southern Gaza is hit. In one video, as a doctor holds up bloodied clothes to show journalists there's another strike. Reuters confirmed that its cameraman Hussam al-Masri was killed. He'd been operating a live TV feed on the roof, and it shut down at the instant of the initial strike.
Witnesses say there was a second just as rescue crews began arriving. In Northern California, the flames of a fast-moving wildfire have scorched almost 7,000 acres of wine country, and they're only 11% contained. CBS's Carter Evans spoke with CAL FIRE's Dustin Martin on the challenges of potential interference from drones.
As soon as there's a drone seen, all the planes have to leave. When that drone leaves, they're not automatically right back where they were.
So it takes them off of the fire at a critical time, too.
Yes, absolutely.
If you drive a Honda, a new recall could affect you. WWJ's Jeff Gilbert.
Honda had already recalled 250,000 vehicles, but the government has had 414 reports of engine failures and others.
자, 여기서 끊어가도록 하겠습니다. 자, 수익 청산 사인 드리도록 하겠습니다. 수익 청산 후에 재진입 사인 드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 현재 진입건 수익 청산입니다.
Keurig says it's buying another coffee giant, Peet's, for $18 billion. Keurig is planning to split its coffee and soda businesses. It owns Dr. Pepper and 7-Up amid softening demand and stiffer competition from cheaper store brands. The Dow is down 111 points. This is CBS News.
수익 청산 사인들입니다.
주문 청산이 완료되었습니다.
자, 9차 진입뷰 대기하도록 하겠습니다. 이어서 9차 진입뷰 대기하도록 하겠습니다.
President Trump's demanding a shamed baseball great be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Roger Clemens was a dominant pitcher.
Clemens has set a major league record for strikeouts in a game.
And he was linked to steroid use in the 2007 Mitchell report. He's denied it, but it kept him from getting the votes needed to get into the Hall. Trump said he shot a round of golf with Clemens and called him easily one of the few greatest pitchers of all time. Clemens acknowledged the post with one of his own. Disgraced by gambling and the commissioner removed lifetime bans on deceased players, theoretically making Rose eligible for the Hall. Steve Kathan, CBS News.
From the pandemic era quiet quitting to quiet cracking. New report from the app Resume Builder finds the trend of employees doing the bare minimum has given rise to workers who suffer from a persistent feeling of unhappiness that leads to disengagement. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
This is Bloomberg
자,
Intelligence
매도진입니다.
with Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield. These are two big-time blue-chip companies. One person's chaos is another person's animal spirits.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Our view is that the economy is slowing down.
There is the possibility of a death spiral.
Both quantum computing and AI are going to power the future.
People are just buying everything with tech.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
Good Monday morning from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City to our worldwide audience. We are streaming as well. Head over to Bloomberg, head over to podcasts and go over to Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Podcast, all that kind of stuff on YouTube. That's where you'll find us. We're there every day, and we appreciate that. Coming up, we're going to check in with Stuart Paul, U.S. economist, and get his thoughts on Jackson Hole. What's the Fed going to do? Chairman Jay Powell's got kind of a hard road to go here and parsing through this economic data. Anurag Rana, Bloomberg Intelligence technology analyst, talk to us about Apple. They're going to be having a whole bunch of new phones coming out, so that should be interesting. Shayna Sissel is going to join us as well. She's a founder and CEO of Ban Rion Capital Management. So a lot coming up here. I got Alexis Christoforous joining me again today. Alexis, thanks for joining us here in studio. So we got a lot happening for the next 2 hours. Right now, let's kick it all off. Mr. Charlie Powell.
All right, I thank you very much. Back to work Monday. We got NASDAQ swinging between gains and losses higher right now. This Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR. Will initial jobless claims exceed 220,000 for the week ending August 30th, 2025? At IBKR forecast trader, the yes was recently at 50%. Start predicting today at ibkr.com/forecast. Last trading day for this contract is September 4th. Right now, the S&P 500 index lower by 10, drop there of 0.2%. The Dow down 0.4% after Friday's surge, down 166. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares down 0.3%. But on a week in which we get Nvidia earnings, our Mag 7 index is advancing by 0.3%. The 10-year at 4.28%, with the 2-year 3.72%. Gold flat on the day, $33.71 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude right now up 1.4%, $64.57 a barrel, and Bitcoin down 1%, 111,670 on Bitcoin. Concerns about tariffs and their impact on inflation and corporate profits back in focus this morning. Henrietta Treyz is Director of Economic Policy Research at Veda Partners. She was the guest this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance.
When Powell says we could see tariffs be a one and done kind of event, think about what's happening. We're getting de minimis change for, I don't know, the 4th, 5th, 6th time this week. We're getting 50% tariffs put on India. Now we're having additional tariffs put on furniture. Those tariffs are going on countries that we already have 50% tariffs on.
And you can hear more of the conversation with Henrietta Treyz of Veda Partners on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Deal news, Keurig Dr. Pepper is buying JDE Peet's of the Netherlands for $18.4 billion to bolster its struggling coffee business before kicking off a split of its operations. Keurig Dr. Pepper shares, they're down 8.6%. JD Peet's, though right now the ADRs are surging by 16.3%. Recapping, NASDAQ now up by 0.1%. Keeping it all in context, we got the S&P down 0.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pelleton, thank you so much. We appreciate that. As always, Alexis Christoforous joins us here this morning. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, and we're streaming live on YouTube as well. Head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Local Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. Let's take a look at some of the stocks on the move today. I'm Paul Sweeney with Alexis Christoforous, and we're joined by Red Brown. Red, what do you got for us?
Yeah, first one on the list is Keurig Dr. Pepper. The ticker there is KDP, and that is down around 8% at the moment. It's the most in the S&P 500 and its steepest drop since 2020. And that move is obviously coming off of the big news this morning that the company is in to buy JDE Peet's, a Dutch coffee company, for around $18 billion. At the conclusion of the deal, those two will separate the coffee and soft drinks businesses into two U.S.-listed companies. So, yeah, the reaction, I guess, this morning, maybe just in response to, that price, $18 billion for the company. And it's kind of a difficult space right now in coffee. that whole industry kind of going through quite a few pressures between environmental pressures on the coffee crops and also trade pressures as well. So I guess remains to be seen kind of how this quite complicated transaction does pan out. But yeah, shares tanking at the moment.
Bankers get paid though.
They do get paid.
Put the deal
They
together.
always do.
And then split them up again. I mean, that's just awesome.
This undoes the deal that happened in 2018, doesn't it?
Yes. Somebody at some point thought, let's put them together. And now they're saying, let's split them apart.
And then another 5 years, we can do it again.
There we go.
We can do it again. Good stuff there. The bankers and lawyers, they get paid. All right, what's next?
Also on my radar is RH, formerly Restoration Hardware, and that ticker is RH. Those shares, those fell as much as 10% at the opening. That was the most since April, so since around the tariff announcements originally. And this is again kind of a tariff-driven story. President Trump over the weekend announced that the administration will be investigating tariffs for the furniture market. That investigation should be completed within 50 days. Some other names also down alongside RH, Wayfair, Our House, and Williams-Sonoma, all trading a little lower this morning. I thought this was really interesting just because if you look on the Bloomberg terminal data, it looks like the company actually gets around 82% of its supply domestically. So I guess there's still concerns about what this could mean for sourcing of materials, things like that. It just seems like the kind of pattern of these investigations is there's the initial kind of shock that the industry will be kind of looking at higher prices before things kind of peter out. But yeah, this is also another one of these instances of like Whirlpool is another one of these companies who has really big domestic supply. They say that tariffs eventually will benefit the company in the long run. So I guess we can see kind of how RH plays this, and just in terms of like the PR front and all of these companies, what they're going to say in their next earnings statements over here in the next couple of months. So yeah, still kind of a moving story at the moment. But yeah, RH and the furniture makers struggling this morning.
I thought we got all our furniture from North Carolina.
I know.
I live down in North Carolina. They have furniture places
big
all over
furniture
the
capital.
place.
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
Trump said that he mentioned North Carolina in his announcement that he wants furniture to be made in North Carolina once again. So
most of it was. Anyway, what do I know? All right, one more.
We have Variant Systems. Shares are down around 1% at the open here, but they were surging this morning after private equity firm Thoma Bravo said that they will be buying the company for $1.23 billion. That price represents about an 18% premium prior to the announcement. So yeah, just kind of building on the private equity firm's efforts to continue to deepen its software portfolio. They will combine this company actually with another one of their portfolio companies, Calabrio, if I'm saying that correctly.
It is correct.
Admittedly not familiar with these companies, but I think the really interesting thing and kind of why we're watching this morning is just kind of the aggressive, the aggressiveness with which Thoma Bravo has been kind of deepening its software portfolio. They bought Dayforce earlier this year for $12.3 billion.
Last week.
Right.
Oh yeah, there you go. And then also they bought Boeing's flight navigation unit for $10.6 billion. So
they're all in.
They're going very deep on software. I think they see the kind of the disruption within the economy right now and how it's affecting some shares as an opportunity, I guess. Okay. So yeah, we'll see how this plays out.
All right, Red, appreciate it. Red Brown, Bloomberg earnings reporter. For more conversations like this, subscribe to our new Stock Movers Reports. Listen for 5-minute audio reports on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. Subscribe to Stock Movers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. Very, I guess, newsworthy Jackson Hole last week, for sure.
I would say that's a bit of an understatement.
And Tom Keene was out there. Lisa Abramowitz was out there. The Odd Lots team was out there. We had full coverage out there. So let's get a little bit of a, I guess we can take a little bit of a hindsight here. We can take a look at what happened out there. Stuart Paul joins us, U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics. Stuart, what was your takeaway from Fed Chairman Jay Powell's speech out there in Jackson Hole?
I really had 3 takeaways from the entire conference.
Okay.
The first from Chairman Powell is that he kicked the door wide open for a September rate cut by acknowledging that the balance of risk has shifted toward missing on the employment side of their mandate more than missing on the inflation side of their mandate. It's a relatively big pivot from the chairman himself. But this is the second observation from Jackson Hole. There is not a clear consensus among the committee members. We've had great reporting from folks like Mike McKee out there and the entire Odd Lots crew and the surveillance crew meeting with a whole multitude of members of the FOMC, many of whom, including Susan Collins from Boston, including Beth Hammack from Cleveland, struck a relatively hawkish tone. So while the chairman might be trying to pivot towards a rate cut in September, I think that we're still pretty far from seeing a real consensus on the committee And my third and final observation is that the rewriting of the monetary policy framework takes on actually a more hawkish tone than the previous monetary policy framework. Previously, they focused on trying to make sure that there was not a material undershooting on the maximum employment side of the objectives of their mandate. So they were going to try to keep on the gas to support the labor market. And during periods of low inflation, they would overshoot on inflation to make up for the previous undershooting. That's now gone also. Instead, they're focused on establishing and anchoring inflation expectations around 2%. So in the near term, a relatively dovish pivot from the chairman. For the long run, a relatively more hawkish framework for implementing monetary policy.
Stuart, I want to dig a little more into that new framework because I feel like it didn't sort of get the attention it probably should have last week. How might it inform monetary policy going forward?
Well, the thing that the Federal Reserve had been paying attention to before the 2020 monetary policy framework review was the fact that they had been undershooting their 2% core inflation goal for years. They've been staying between 1.5% and 2% for years. And when that's the case, there's a little bit of an indication that monetary policy just during the regular course of business is too tight. Their goal is 2%. If they're undershooting on inflation, they're maintaining too restrictive of a monetary policy stance. So they revised their 2020 framework so that they would then follow those undershooting periods with overshooting. They would ease off the brakes and provide a little bit more gas to the economy. Now, after experiencing the post-COVID pandemic, the post-COVID boom in inflation, and realizing that folks are not willing to live with higher inflation, they've rewritten their framework to say, no, even if we've gone through a period of undershooting on inflation, we are not going to get on the gas. We're going to, again, just try to stay around that 2% target. So relative to where we were following the 2020 revised framework, this is a more hawkish monetary policy framework.
All right, we'll see how it plays out. Stuart Paul, thank you so much. Appreciate it as always. Stuart Paul, he's a U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics, joining us live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Coming up, we're going to check in with Anurag Rana. Apparently, Apple's going to kick off a 3-year iPhone redesign push, so we'll be all over that. And then Shana Sissel, founder and CEO of Banrion Capital Management, discuss her outlook for the market. She does alternatives, private equity, private credit, hedge funds, all that kind of stuff. So I want to delve into kind of what alternatives make sense in this market. A little bit of red and green on the screen. S&P down 11 points. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
자, 현재 수익권에 있습니다. 목표 수익권까지 조금 더 지켜보도록 하겠습니다. 현재 수익권에서 대응이 이루어지고 있습니다. 목표 수익권까지 조금 더 지켜보도록 하겠습니다. 자, 여기서 수익 청산 사인 드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 수익 청산하도록 하겠습니다. 자, 수익 청산입니다. 자, 수익 청산하도록 하겠습니다. 자, 5개 합치 진량 200만원 수익 청산 사인 드렸습니다. 수익 청산 사인 200만원에서 수익 청산 사인 드렸습니다.
주문 청산이 완료되었습니다.
자, 10차 진입뷰 대기하도록 하겠습니다. 10차 진입뷰에서 바로 드리도록 하겠습니다.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at